Hey guys, tonight we begin the Odyssey. It's late, and the world outside your window has grown quiet. The breeze has softened, the lights are dim, and the night feels like a slow tide rolling in. Tonight, we'll wander far, across salt blue seas and long-forgotten shores, following the gentle, winding story of Odysseus. But don't worry, nothing about this night will hurry. The gods, the sea, and even time itself will move slowly, patiently, as your mind begins to rest. You can imagine a flicker of firelight on an old stone path. Maybe the calm sound of the Aegean whispering somewhere nearby. A place where sandals rest by doorways and olive branches sway like lullabies. Our story begins not with battle or gods, but with gentleness, in the soft hills of Ithaca, where a clever man once dreamed of peace. As the stars come out, it feels as though the whole sky leans close to listen. Maybe you can hear the faint hum of a lyre somewhere, quiet and soft, carried by the wind. Time back then felt slower. Nights were longer, filled with simple stories shared beside a glowing fire, while the sea waited patiently in the dark, endless and calm. Odysseus was a man both restless and thoughtful, always listening to the wind as if it carried words just for him. You can almost picture his wife, Penelope, weaving under flickering lamplight, the sound of her loom tapping softly, the rhythm slow and even. Outside, sheep wander lazily across dry summer hills. The sky melts into shades of violet and honey. Everything feels still, familiar, safe. As you listen, let your thoughts drift like sails over calm waters. Odysseus will set out soon, but for now, the air holds peace. The old storytellers say the ship creaked quietly, as if dreaming of the voyage ahead. You might imagine the smell of salt, the gentle splash of waves brushing wood. That's the rhythm of the Odyssey, not rushing, but breathing. An old story told for those who linger by the fire long after others have gone to bed. If you close your eyes, you can feel the slow rocking of the sea, the whisper of faraway islands, the quiet hum of time itself. Odysseus' story stretches across oceans and years, but tonight, it isn't about heroism or glory. It's about patience, longing, and coming home, whispered softly, like a lullaby from history. And now, as we drift together into this myth, remember, you can let go of the day. You can simply float through each moment as though carried by the same moonlit tide that once guided Odysseus home. So take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and let the story begin, slow and endless, like the sea itself. But before we dive in, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It's a small gesture that truly helps the channel grow. And I'm always curious to know where in the world you're listening from, and at what time of night. The island of Ithaca never hurried. Even in the midday sun, its hills seemed to dream beneath the shimmering air. Olive trees, swaying like quiet companions to the sea. On this island of rocks and vineyards lived Odysseus, clever, patient, yet always staring a little too long at the horizon. The world was peaceful then. Long before the rumors of war reached the island, life drifted along like a soft current. The people of Ithaca would rise early, when the sky was still silver and blue, and the scent of damp earth lingered after the cool night. Fishermen took their woven nets down toward the coves, their sandals brushing dust from narrow stone paths. Women went to the wells in groups, their laughter echoing lightly between clay walls. And in the royal hall, faint harp music occasionally hummed through the morning air, slow and delicate. Odysseus often liked to walk before the sun had fully risen. He would leave the palace quietly, passing by the fig trees planted by his father long ago. His steps were slow, sure, the ground familiar beneath his sandals. The goats stirred as he passed, and the first birds began calling softly from the olive branches. Some servants would follow from a distance, carrying baskets or tools, though Odysseus rarely asked for company. He liked to think alone, to let his mind wander through problems and patterns, quietly solving riddles that the day had not yet posed. He was not yet the great wanderer or the man of many ways, as the poets would later call him. He was simply a thoughtful man from an island small enough that the sea was always visible. The breeze smelled faintly of thyme and salt. There was always a comfort in that, the reminder that the sea was near, but not yet calling. At home, The palace was waking slowly. Penelope would sit near a long window where sunlight pooled across the tiled floor, weaving delicate patterns in the air. Her loom made a rhythmic sound, steady, like water spilling softly from a jug. The weaving of a queen looked no different from the weaving of any woman in Ithaca. It was the same patience, the same repetition, the same quiet rhythm of care. Young servants fetched water or spun wool in corners. A few would bring jars of oil or sealed amphorae from storage, setting them by the wall where shadows stayed cool. The household carried its own gentle music, wood against stone, cloth brushing hands, the soft murmur of motion. Little Telemachus, still a small boy, loved to watch his mother work. He would lie on the floor near her feet, his cheek resting on his arm, eyes half closed as the threads moved above him. Sometimes Penelope told him that each pattern on the fabric meant something: a sunrise, a journey, a song. He didn't understand, but he liked to imagine that the cloth itself whispered secrets as it passed through the loom. Elsewhere, in the meadows below the hill, shepherds tended their flocks. The sound of bells carried faintly up from the valley, mingling with the rustle of reeds. The goats bleated occasionally, wandering among wildflowers, and the shepherds sang under their breath old songs that had no name. These men lived closer to the earth than the sea. They were part of the land itself, their eyes steady with the sun, their speech unhurried and kind. Few people thought of wars or kings here. The talk of Troy had not yet reached Ithaca in any serious way. Word traveled slowly between the islands back then, by trading ships that drifted between harbors with cargoes of pottery and grain. When sailors stopped in Ithaca's small bay, they were usually weary from storms, their ships crusted with salt. They brought news of festivals, harvests, and sometimes quarrels among lords far east across the archipelago. But these tales seemed distant, like dreams seen through mist. The people of Ithaca simply smiled and returned to tending goats, repairing nets, or mending sandals by candlelight. In the palace courtyard, old Laertes, the father of Odysseus, spent most mornings pruning his vines. He had worked this way his whole life, and even after crowns and titles had come into the family, he preferred to live half as a farmer. His hands were darkened with soil. His fingernails carried the smell of grapes and earth. He believed peace was a small thing you built every day, not something you could command with words or laws. When Odysseus came to visit, the two didn't talk much. Mostly, they walked along the vines in silence, both men understanding that love could be quiet too. The world around them offered no urgency. The only passing of time was marked by sunlight slowly turning across the fields and the distant call of seabirds. Sometimes Odysseus sat on a low stone wall and watched the horizon, tracing the faint outlines of distant islands. He thought of merchants who sailed between them, men with brown faces and woven ropes, traders who knew every current. He wondered what it would feel like to follow those same paths, to see lands known only by rumor, to learn the shapes of other harbors and hills. The first winds of change came not as storms, but as whispers. They crossed the Aegean quietly, moving from island to island with the traveling merchants, stitched into gossip, half a secret and half a story. Somewhere on the mainland, a queen had vanished, or perhaps been taken. Some said it was Helen of Sparta, the most beautiful woman in Greece. Others said it was all invention, the kind of tale men told after drinking too much wine. But the rumor grew legs, and the men who passed through Ithaca's harbors began to speak, with a tone of certainty. Kings were sending messengers. Ships were being called from every island. The oath of loyalty once sworn by the lords of Greece, an old promise made in peace, had come due. For several days, the palace felt different. The servants spoke quietly. The hearth seemed smaller in its light. Even the air had changed, carrying with it that metallic scent of approaching destiny. Penelope noticed first. Odysseus walked longer near the cliffs each evening, pausing often, his hand resting on the stone walls as though trying to memorize their texture. Sometimes she would watch him from the window, the sun setting gold behind him. The sea would turn into a smooth mirror of light, and she would notice in his stance both strength and hesitation, as though his heart already knew what was coming. Odysseus had always been clever, thoughtful, yet now there was something unsettled in his silence, not fear, but the awareness of fate moving closer. The next morning, a small ship arrived from the east. Its sail was patched, its ropes thick with salt. The men aboard carried few goods, only scrolls and messages marked with the seals of kings. One of them, wearing a bronze clasp shaped like a lion's paw, carried the summons from Agamemnon himself. He bowed deeply to Odysseus and spoke with a voice both respectful and grave. The words were simple. The kings of Greece were gathering at Aulis. Every lord who had once vied for Helen's hand had sworn to defend her marriage. Now they were bound by that ancient oath. They would sail together to Troy, to demand her return. The messenger did not say anything about war directly. He didn't need to. The sound of the sea filled every silence in the courtyard like the echo of a distant drum. That evening, Odysseus hosted the travelers in his hall. They ate modestly, roasted fish, olives, bread with oil, fresh figs from the trees near the courtyard. Talk rose softly through the smoke, and the topic stayed away from swords and kings. They spoke instead about the winds, about navigation, about how the moon changed the color of the water. Yet even through such simple conversation, the truth sat like an unseen guest among them. When the visitors slept in the lower quarters, Odysseus stayed awake. He stared into the fire long after the logs had burned to red coals. He thought of his son asleep down the corridor, barely old enough to speak in full sentences. He thought of Penelope's weaving, the loom standing unfinished by the open balcony. He thought of Laertes, tending to his vine-covered hill the next morning, unaware that his son might be leaving before sunrise. The war called, not out of glory, but out of obligation. It was the kind of duty that belonged not to the heart, but to history. The following day, he walked through the olive hills once more. The paths were the same, the groves quiet under the soft morning mist. He visited his father in the vineyard. Laertes did not ask questions. He only looked at his son for a long moment, then nodded. Both men understood without words. Odysseus had been raised among these very stones, these same breezes, but now he would leave them behind, not because he wished to, but because the world beyond Ithaca demanded it. Before sunset, he returned home. Penelope met him at the door. They did not speak immediately. There were no grand farewells, only a soft kind of understanding that filled the silence between them. She knew he would go. He knew she would wait. In the space of that unspoken promise, the story of their lifetime was quietly sealed. The servants began to pack supplies, coils of rope, jars of olives, small amphorae of wine. The bronze sword that had not been touched in years was taken from its stand and polished by lamplight. Every sound felt slower, heavier, reverent. The next days became a melancholy ritual. The harbor was busy again, not with trade but preparation. Craftsmen oiled the masts and tightened ropes. The sails were stretched and tested against the breeze. Workers sang softly while rolling barrels down to the shore, their voices carrying like echoes across stone walls. The people of Ithaca came to watch. They didn't cheer, nor did they mourn. They simply stood by the docks and looked on quietly, as if sensing that this departure was different from any other voyage. The older women brought food. The younger ones helped mend fishing nets in the shade. Even the shepherds from the hills came down to the harbor, their cloaks smelling faintly of grass and smoke. Odysseus moved among them, helping where he could, tying knots, speaking kindly to each man who would sail under his command. For all his cleverness, his first gift was presence. He looked people in the eye, and they believed him. At night, when the harbor settled into silence, he would walk alone to the edge of the water. The moon painted silver paths on the sea's surface, and somewhere beyond that horizon, destiny waited. The morning of parting came gently, wrapped in a thin silver mist. Roosters called far from the town. A few torches still burned where sailors finished preparations. Odysseus stood waiting as dawn slowly colored the horizon in pale rose and gold. Behind him, Penelope and Telemachus appeared, the child clinging sleepily to her hand. For a long moment, the family stood without speaking. The air smelled faintly of myrtle and salt. The fog lifted just enough to show the ship, ready and silent. Penelope stepped forward, her fingers lightly brushing his arm. She said only one sentence, something soft, almost inaudible, but it carried every emotion her heart could not express. Odysseus answered not with promise, but with a long, steady look. Then, without drama, he turned and walked down the worn stone steps toward the waiting crew. The sails caught wind slowly, gracefully, as though reluctant to leave. From the shore, Ithaca looked dreamlike that morning, bathed in gold, wrapped in sea mist, still half asleep. The ship moved outward, leaving only ripples, and as Penelope stood watching from the cliffs, her veil caught the rising wind and lifted slightly, like a white bird saying farewell. The songs of the harbor faded into the distance, replaced by the sound of waves, calm, circular, unending. Thus began the quiet departure that would echo through decades in poems, though neither Odysseus nor Penelope yet grasped how long the journey would truly be. And on that silent morning, as sunlight grew brighter across the sea, Ithaca exhaled softly and waited. The voyage across the Aegean took longer than they expected. The winds were temperamental, shifting directions with no logic, and at times the fleet had to drift aimlessly while the sailors sang old hymns to calm the uneasy silence. Days blurred into one another, the same sigh of the waves, the same gulls circling the masts, the same faces weathered by salt and sun, and among them Odysseus grew quieter still. He kept his composure even as the days stretched into weeks, as the shores they passed flickered like distant mirages, untouchable and serene. By the time they reached the shores of Troy, the world already seemed smaller. The coastline unfolded in pale sand and thin threads of green hills. The sky hung low that morning, gray and warm, as if holding its breath. When the Greek ships landed together along the beach, their masts looked like a forest of thin black spires, standing against the sea. But this first arrival was almost peaceful. No clashing metal, no cries. Only the careful creak of anchors dropping, ropes tightening, wooden hulls nudging against the tide. Odysseus stepped onto the sand and felt it sink slightly beneath his boots. He bent down, picked up a handful of it, and let it spill between his fingers. So this was Troy, or at least the beginning of it. The Greeks built their camp slowly, as though they might only stay for a season. But seasons turned into years, and the camp grew like a small city beside the sea. There were no tall walls, only rows of tents, their canvas bleached pale by sun. Paths formed between them, traces of routine, habits of thousands of men living in the same rhythm. Odysseus's tent stood near the center, modest yet ordered. He kept scrolls sealed in wax and a few small trinkets from Ithaca tucked inside a chest. A wooden comb from Penelope, a stone carved by his son's hand, and a folded scrap of linen still faintly scented with olive oil and thyme. He rarely looked at them, but he liked to know they were there, reminders of a quiet place beyond the endless sand. Mornings began with the soft sounds of banners stirring in the breeze. The air smelled faintly of ash and wheat. Soldiers cooked simple meals near low fires, bread baked on flat stones, fish caught from the shallows. Water was drawn from wells dug in the sand. Despite the rumors of war nearby, most days passed like this. Slow, repetitive, uneventful, filled with small human work. Odysseus became known not just for his wit, but for his patience. He listened more than he spoke, preferring to study the moods of others, the temper of Achilles, the dignity of Ajax, the weary kindness of old Nestor. Life at the camp was less glorious than songs would suggest. It was long days of repairs, of tending wounds, of quiet conversations beside dying fires. The idea of victory came and went like mist. When evening arrived, the men gathered around the flickering torches. There were stories, half-remembered jokes. A cup of water whined passed hand to hand. Even heroes grow bored, Odysseus thought. Even legends must sleep. He often walked to the edge of the sea after sunset. The waves along Troy's shore murmured in the same gentle rhythm as those of Ithaca, as if mocking the idea of distance. Stars sprinkled the surface of the water. Somewhere, across that darkness, his island still existed. His wife still wove. His son still grew. His father still pruned the vines. The thought was enough to make the long nights bearable. At night, fires dotted the sand like small constellations. Beyond them rose Troy itself, a distant glow on the hill, faint and unchanging. From the camp, it looked deceptively calm. The city's towers gleamed sometimes under the moon, its walls massive yet silent. Between armies stretched the open plain, a vast, still expanse that smelled of grass and salt. The two sides were separated by duty and story. They rarely saw one another. There were no loud battles every night, no endless noise. Some days passed entirely without conflict. The stillness became its own world. Among the soldiers, time dulled fear. Superstitions took shape instead. Notes were carved into driftwood and cast into the sea as offerings. Some believed gods wandered through tents disguised as strangers, testing men by kindness or cruelty. But Odysseus had little space for such thinking. He trusted the steady logic of effort and patience. War, in its stillest form, was a contest of endurance. One winter, when the winds turned harsh, snow fell along the hills behind the camp. Few had seen such weather by the sea. The flakes melted almost instantly, vanishing on the heated sands, but their brief dance across the shore brought a hush unlike any other. The men stopped working to watch them fall. Then the snow was gone, leaving behind only the gray clouds that hid the sun for days. Days turned into seasons. Troy never fell, not yet, and the Greeks learned to live as though permanence had found them there. They built storehouses for grain, corrals for horses, even a small shrine where sailors offered libations before they slept. Odysseus helped repair the walls when storms tore them down, and sometimes joined hunts inland for deer and boar. More often, he watched shipwrights crafting from driftwood under the open sky, their hammers tapping softly like a heartbeat. There was time to think, time even to forget why they had come. The call of war became an echo rather than a command. Sometimes, Odysseus wrote small notes on pieces of bark, plans, fragments of thoughts, or short designs for traps and fortifications. He hid these beneath stones, not because anyone would read them, but because writing calmed him. It gave him a way to speak into the air without being heard. In the afternoons, when the heat grew thick and still, he would lie in his tent with the flap open, letting the faint sea breeze pass across his face. The hum of camp sounds carried in, a conversation, the creak of rope, a dog barking somewhere. Thousands of men lived side by side like this, yet each felt an island unto himself. Time, slow and repetitive, stretched onward. Children who had been born before the war were now nearly grown back home. Even the elders began to doubt whether they would see their islands again. Odysseus watched ships arrive with new supplies, bearing goods and letters from distant ports. But letters grew rarer each passing year. Some were lost to storms, others to the chaos of command. The distance between the camp and home became immeasurable. Yet in moments of stillness, something quietly sacred filled the air. The sense that, even in this long waiting, there was meaning. The men had built their own rhythm of existence, one that mirrored the patient cycles of nature. Sunrise, work, meal, rest. It was not glory they lived, but persistence. Odysseus dreamed often of Ithaca. He dreamed of the smell of crushed olives, of Penelope's loom, of his father's vineyard under morning dew. He dreamed, and then he woke, to another dawn on the same pale shore, the same hum of life continuing, unbroken. As the years gathered like sand in quiet drifts, something inside him began to shift. He no longer longed for victory. He longed for peace. But peace seemed an idea reserved for other times, like a song half forgotten. Still, he smiled sometimes. The men respected him, not as a warrior, but as a thinker. They sought his counsel when storms rose, when plans faltered, when tempers flared. And he offered it gently, never raising his voice, never hurrying his words. He learned that wisdom could exist even where hope faded, that patience itself could be an act of courage. The siege at Troy became less a war and more a way of life, filled with cooking fires, worn sandals, salt-stiffened sails, and the soft scrape of waves against the same relentless beach. When the stars came out each night, he would stand facing them, as though they might whisper news of home through the wind. And though no messenger ever came, the stars themselves seemed alive, quiet, watchful, eternal. The siege continued. Time drifted onward, and amidst the encampment's slow rustle and persistent calm, Odysseus waited, the clever man who would one day become a wanderer, though he did not yet know how far the gods would carry him. Years had passed since the Greeks first placed their ships along Troy's shore. Seasons came and went, the same tide washing in, the same footprints fading out. The sky changed colors, the winds turned and returned, yet the city stood untouched, quiet behind its high stone walls. Odysseus often stared at those distant towers, thinking less of conquest and more of time itself, how it could stretch so far and still feel motionless. The army had grown older, armor dulled, hair silvered, tempers softened like river stones. Many soldiers no longer spoke of home, only of the next dawn, the next meal, the next year. Then, one night, a windless calm settled over the camp. The sea lay flat and black beneath the stars. Fires burned low, their smoke drifting upward like faint prayers. It was the kind of night in which thoughts could travel far and return slowly. Odysseus sat beside the dim glow of a single lamp, tracing lines with a small bronze stylus across sand. Shapes took form, a rough outline, part beast, part vessel. The idea had come to him quietly, not as a flash but a murmur, a hint carried by the long patience of years. A trick, yes, but made of stillness, not noise. At first light, he brought his idea to the commanders. There was no boasting in his voice, only a quiet certainty. He explained that Troy could not be broken by walls or force, but perhaps by belief, by suggestion, by the gentleness of illusion. They listened in silence, their brows furrowed in thought. The oldest among them, Nestor, wise and weary, nodded slowly. Sometimes, he said, victory belongs to those who wait long enough to see a different path. And so, among the weary tents and weathered sails, they began to build something extraordinary. The craftsmen came first, men who had once built ships, repaired masts, carved ornament for temples. Their hands were steady, their movements sure. They worked not with the frenzy of war, but with the care of artists restoring an old statue. Each plank was sanded smooth, each beam fitted together like a puzzle. The horse took shape day by day, not out of haste, but devotion. It was an offering, they said, a gift to the gods of the city, a symbol of surrender. Yet every line of the structure hid quiet purpose. Inside, space enough for men to rest, breathe, wait. The sounds of construction were strangely peaceful. The rhythmic tap of mallets, the creak of rope, the whisper of planers smoothing wood grain. Sometimes a breeze carried the scent of pine resin and smoke along the camp. It mixed with the salt air to create something familiar, almost comforting. As days passed, the horse grew taller than any hut, its head tilted slightly toward the sea, as though gazing patiently at the horizon it would never cross. Men walking nearby found themselves lowering their voices, as if in the presence of something sacred. At night, the fires around it glowed like halos in the mist. The moon silvered the wood, giving the beast an almost living presence. It wasn't just a stratagem now. It was a monument to endurance. Odysseus visited the construction site each evening, often in silence. Sometimes he touched the side of the wooden frame, feeling the faint warmth it had gathered from the day's sun. His thoughts wandered back to Ithaca, to Penelope's loom, to her tireless weaving. Both their crafts involved patience. Both shaped meaning one small thread, one plank at a time. He admired how the carpenters moved, slow, deliberate, their rhythm in tune with the waves that lapped at the shore. This, too, was part of his nature, the art of building things meant to last, even in deceit. For Odysseus' mind worked not in lightning, but in tides, quiet, steady, purposeful. In the camp, the talk of the horse spread like a soft rumor. Some mocked it at first, others called it madness. But Odysseus never argued. He let time do the convincing. Even disbelief, if left long enough, would settle into silence. And so the structure continued to rise. The polished chestnut wood gleamed under sunlight, smoothed by so many hands that it reflected the glow of the sky. When it was nearly finished, the Greeks began their charade of departure. Ships were dragged to the edge of the water. Sails were mended and prepared. Banners came down, fires were extinguished. To the watchmen on the Trojan walls, it might have looked like the end of a long storm, the sea swallowing armies at last. The horse stood alone now, massive and calm, a tribute, a relic, a symbol of surrender, or so it seemed. That night, the camp was quiet. Only a handful of ships remained hidden behind a small island off the coast. the rest of the army gone from sight, waiting in still water. The few who stayed behind would row silently back once the horse had entered the city. Odysseus chose his companions carefully, men patient and calm, capable of long silence. As they climbed into the hollow chamber within the horse, the air smelled of cedar and smoke. The interior was cramped but steady, carved smooth, and lined with leather bindings to muffle sound. Before the openings were sealed, Odysseus looked once toward Troy's walls. They glowed faintly under starlight, massive and ancient, like a sleeping giant. Then all light was shut out. Only breath remained, slow, controlled, endless. Time moved differently inside that wooden belly. Minutes stretched like hours, and hours dissolved into waiting. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint creak of wood as the structure shifted with the night wind. Outside, Trojan scouts approached cautiously, their torches flickering red against the horses' flanks. Voices murmured, curious but unsuspecting. They marveled at the craftsmanship, the scale, the beauty of it. Odysseus could hear the muffled echoes, laughter here, a shout there, the scrape of armor. Then silence again. The men hidden within felt the vibration of footsteps through the wood. At dawn, they sensed movement, the scraping pull of ropes, the strain of oxen dragging them forward. The great body shifted and tilted with careful rhythm. And then, surprisingly, they felt calm descending again. The motion stopped. The air around them grew still and filled with different echoes. The hum of voices above, different now, closer and enclosed. They were within the city's walls. All through that day, Odysseus and his companions waited in shadow. Through the narrow seams between beams, faint streaks of light shifted as the sun crossed the sky. Sometimes they heard children laughing, the creak of cart wheels, the gentle ring of bells. Troy lived normally around them, unaware that time had gathered them all into its final pause. Inside the horse, sleep came in fragments. The stillness was heavy, almost protective. There were no battles, no tension, only the floating sense that everything now belonged to fate. In the quietest moments, Odysseus thought of Ithaca again. He saw in his memory the sea moving softly below the olive cliffs. He heard Penelope's weaving. He felt the weight of sunlight across vineyard leaves. His mind wandered gently homeward, even as he sat inside this dark, hollow monument to deceit. He wondered whether the gods slept as men did, or whether they watched, distant and silent, as stories unrolled toward their endings. Evening fell outside, unseen but felt. The air cooled, the city's sound softened, and then, far away, a faint signal shimmered through the night, the flicker of flames along the distant shore where the hidden ships waited. Odysseus opened his eyes. Another long silence passed. The time of calm was ending, but in the stillness before motion, everything seemed wrapped in peace. And thus, as Troy slept under its final stars, Odysseus waited within wood and shadow, far from home, dreaming quietly of light upon the sea. The story of the horse would become legend, told in every tavern and court for centuries. But in truth, it had begun and ended in stillness. For war, even in victory, moves no faster than the human heart. And Odysseus, patient and careful, understood that every great turning of history first begins as a whisper, a breath, and a moment of rest. The wood creaked again. Somewhere outside, a door opened. Footsteps echoed softly on stone. And in that silence, the journey turned, from siege to homebound longing, from war to wander. The night folded gently around them. Odysseus closed his eyes once more and listened to the wooden walls breathe. Beneath his calm, the sea waited, vast and unchanging, ready to take him once again across its sleeping skin. The dawn that rose after Troy's silence carried no celebration. It was a pale, heavy light, the kind that obscures as much as it reveals. Smoke still hung faint above the hills, thin, ghostly ribbons, drifting inland. The sea beyond the beaches was calm again, but its calm felt watchful, like something remembering. Odysseus stood on the shore as the tide lapped quietly at his boots. His face caught the faint reflection of the fading fires behind him. He thought of how long he had waited for that morning. 10 years, or perhaps an entire lifetime disguised as one. And now that it had come, there was no triumph in it, only stillness. The wind carried faint traces of burnt cedar, and ash mixed with salt. Seabirds circled somewhere far above. His crew moved silently, loading provisions, coiling ropes, readying the oars. The long ships, black and sleek, waited like patient hounds. No one spoke. The air itself seemed unwilling to disturb the calm. When the last chest was secured and the sails were raised, Odysseus looked one final time toward the smoldering horizon. The towers of Troy still shimmered in heat, silent, reduced, yet in a strange way eternal. He bowed his head slightly, not in victory, but in acknowledgement. Then he turned his gaze toward the open sea. The oars dipped together, blades slicing through the glassy water in unison. The ships glided forward, each creak of the hull blending with the sigh of the morning wind. Behind them, the land began to fade. First the ruins, then the plain, then even the faint shadow of Troy itself. For the first time in years, the Greeks were moving homeward. For days, the weather was merciful. The sea breathed like a living creature beneath them, gentle and regular. Dolphins surfaced alongside the hulls, their arcs mirrored in sunlight. The crew laughed softly at the sight. It felt like a blessing, a promise of peace after a decade of waiting. Odysseus moved among them, not as a commander issuing orders, but as a friend and guide. He helped adjust sails, checked the knots himself, spoke quietly to those who still watched the horizon in restless thought. He preferred the work. It kept his mind from wandering to fears he could not name. At night, the men anchored near small islands scattered like stones across the endless blue. The landfall felt unreal, quiet beaches lined with reeds, the air thick with the scent of thyme and sea fennel. They lit small fires and roasted what little they caught, speaking of home as though it were an idea instead of a place. Ithaca seemed both close and impossibly distant. Odysseus would often stay awake after the others had fallen asleep, listening to the wind. It came in soft breaths through the reeds, carrying the murmur of faraway waves and maybe, if one listened long enough, the echo of unseen gods. Sometimes he thought he could hear Penelope singing to Telemachus, a memory so vivid it seemed alive. Other times, the whisper of the ocean felt like the voice of the past, calm, patient, reminding him how fragile peace could be. When he slept, his dreams were filled with waves that never reached shore. They rose and fell endlessly, carrying his small ship through timeless light. Days turned longer as the fleet scattered slowly across the open sea. Some ships went ahead, some strayed behind, and Odysseus often found himself watching the horizon for sails that came and went like mirages. The sea had its moods, even when gentle, a rhythm that seemed almost human, sometimes restless, sometimes kind. They passed quiet islands where goats grazed over bare cliffs, where streams trickled faintly through fern and stone. The sailors occasionally landed to gather fresh water or wild fruit, to repair oars and bindings. Each island looked different yet familiar, an endless repetition of sea, rock, and sky. The world had no boundaries, only circles. One evening, as the sun sank low, Odysseus stood at the prow of his ship. The sky turned copper, then rose, then darkened into violet. The sails caught the last thread of light before the stars emerged. He listened, not to his men, not to the sea, but to something deeper, perhaps the silent acknowledgement that their wandering had only just begun. He thought of how men believed the end of war meant the end of struggle, how easily they forgot that peace itself demanded endurance. He smiled faintly at the irony. The clever man now at the mercy of winds he could neither predict nor command. As days folded into weeks, the tone of the voyage began to shift. The winds that once sang gently through the sails now grew unpredictable. They turned without warning, playful but confusing. The oarsmen strained against sudden gusts. Voices shouted orders, though softly, aware that panic served nothing at sea. Odysseus remained calm, moving through the ship as if guided by instinct. He watched the clouds shift in strange spirals, the color of steel and cream. He remembered old stories told by sailors in Ithaca about winds that lived as creatures, invisible but hungry, waiting at the edges of the world. Still, he trusted the ocean's pattern. It always told its truth, only in a language most men failed to hear. When the storms did break, they came not with lightning, but with the soft rumble of distant thunder. like a drum muffled by fog. The rain fell gently at first, washing the deck clean, cooling the wood to a darker hue. The men worked efficiently, hands sure, eyes half squinted against the spray. No one cursed. Each drop seemed almost welcome, proof that nature was alive and listening. By nightfall, the storm had passed. The stars returned, bright and near, their reflections trembling on the darkened waves. The sailors ate in near silence, grateful to rest once more. The sea had grown kind again. After weeks of shifting winds, the sky cleared into a calm, endless blue. Days stretched almost without sound, broken only by the steady dip of oars and the faint creak of wood. The men had stopped counting hours. Some thought they already saw Ithaca in every passing island, until each new shoreline looked the same as the last. When land finally appeared one morning, it rose from a low veil of mist like a mirage, pale cliffs, soft green hills, and beyond them a pale shimmer, as though sunlight itself was resting upon the ground. The water around the island was unusually clear. Even the shadows of fish gliding below could be seen as slow silver ribbons, drifting without care. Odysseus watched the coast approach. There was no sound of surf, no cry of birds, only a deep, profound stillness. He felt no fear, only curiosity. The men rowed closer, their eyes heavy from sleepless days of travel. The air above the island shimmered faintly, as if caught between waking and dreaming. They landed at a shallow beach lined with smooth, pale stones. The sand beneath their feet was cool and fine as sifted flour. The air was filled with a faint sweet fragrance, honey, perhaps, or blossoms too delicate to name. The sound of the oars drawing in was the loudest thing for miles. Beyond the beach stretched soft meadows dotted with flowering shrubs and small flowing streams, each murmuring like a lullaby. A few of the men wandered inland, calling out softly to one another. Their voices seemed to vanish quickly, as if the air itself absorbed them. Time slowed as they walked. Every color appeared dim yet beautiful, as though washed gently by memory. The plants that grew everywhere bore small, round blossoms, pale as cream, with petals that shimmered faintly when the wind passed. They grew in quiet abundance, bending gracefully beneath the weight of sunlight. Soon locals appeared, not fierce warriors or armed strangers, but simple islanders with calm eyes and slow smiles. Their garments hung loosely, woven from thin linen, dyed faintly in ochre and blue. They spoke softly in a tongue that sounded like music half remembered from childhood. Odysseus greeted them kindly, offering the trade of goods, but the islanders only smiled and gestured for them to rest. And they offered something, small fruits or blossoms, delicate, glistening, sweet in scent. The sailors took one taste, and their weariness melted away. It was not intoxication, nor laughter, nor song, but peace. A peace so deep that even worry forgot its name. The fruits dissolved softly on the tongue, cool and fragrant, carrying the taste of fields and summers long gone. The men lay down upon the moss and grass, eyes half open, smiles faint. The soft rustle of leaves above them mingled with the gentle hum of insects. It felt, somehow, like home, or beyond home, a place where longing had never existed. Odysseus, cautious, watched quietly at first. He saw how their hands loosened, how their laughter slowed until it became soft murmuring. The men who had been weary only moments before now reclined beneath trees, as though they had always belonged to that island, and their faces, tired from years of war and storm, began to smooth, the lines easing, the furrowed brows fading into stillness. He approached one of them, a friend he had fought beside at Troy. "We should go," Odysseus said gently, but the man only smiled dreamily, eyes half closed, and whispered, "There's nowhere else to go." The air had grown thick with warmth and perfume, a drowsy sweetness that made even speech feel heavy. A slow wind passed over the grass, carrying seeds that drifted like gentle snow. Odysseus understood then that this island was not meant for living. It was meant for forgetting. As the day moved on, the island glowed softly with afternoon light. The shadows lengthened, but it never truly darkened. Twilight here was eternal. The sun seemed trapped just above the mountains, unwilling to fall fully. Birds sang slowly, almost lazily, as though bound to the same spell of rest. Odysseus resisted the fruit, fearing its quiet mercy. He could feel its temptation pressing against his thoughts. A whisper that said, "Lay down. Rest. You've done enough." He knew what it offered. No death, no pain. Only rest. The illusion of home, without the cost of return. And the longer he stayed, the harder it was to remember what leaving meant. He called to his men, his voice calm but firm. For a moment, none moved. One looked up and frowned faintly, as though waking from a pleasant dream. Another asked what the hurry was. "Why return to toil when we have peace here?" But Odysseus could not yield. Patience was his strength, but so was will. He reminded himself of Ithaca, not with triumph or hope, but with duty. The gentle hills, the smell of Penelope's weaving oil, the laughter of a child near the hearth. These were not memories to dissolve in sweetness. He took each man by the shoulders and led him down toward the shore. They followed, unresisting at first, still smiling softly, like sleepwalkers guided through twilight. The islanders watched in silence, neither pleading nor angry. They bowed their heads as the sailors passed, as though knowing that what they offered was both mercy and prison. By the time they reached the shore again, the sea breeze had grown fresher, stronger. The spell of the island thinned with every breath. The men boarded the ship in silence. They did not look back. The sails filled slowly, like lungs drawing a first deep breath after long sleep. The oars dipped into water, still shining from the half-set sun. As the island faded behind them, none spoke. They sat in stillness, their faces calm yet pale, as though something within had been left behind. Odysseus watched the shore shrink until it was only a thread of gold against the horizon. Then it vanished, like a dream dissolving into daylight. He wondered what gods had crafted such a place, a paradise shaped from memory and forgetfulness. Perhaps it was kindness from the divine, perhaps cruelty. Or perhaps the gods understood that men and dreams alike needed places where time could rest, if only for a while. The sea resumed its gentle breathing, endless and serene. The stars appeared one by one, wavering above the curved dark line of the world. The men, still quiet, soon drifted to sleep. Odysseus remained awake, his hand resting on the rudder. The glow of the moon spilled softly across the water. He whispered to the waves, not for strength, but for memory, for the will to keep remembering. The ocean listened, and replied with the faintest touch of foam against the ship's side, a small, eternal rhythm. The night deepened, and the ship glided forward into silence. Those who had tasted the lotus slept like stones, their dreams unbroken. Odysseus sat alone at the bow, eyes open toward the horizon, the map of stars above him bright and vast. He understood that not all danger wore the face of violence. Some came dressed as comfort, and as he steered the ship gently westward, the sea whispered softly to itself, like a cradle song for wandering souls, for men too far from home to sleep, yet too close to dream. Understood. We'll move slowly into Part 7, the land of the Cyclops. This section will stay calm, richly descriptive, and atmospheric, focusing on the strange, quiet isolation of the Cyclops island rather than its violence. The tone remains bedtime soft, no tension, no fear, just curiosity, observation, and poetic stillness. The narration flows gently like the sea, expanding into 2,000 words, with 5 painterly, vintage image prompts woven throughout. The sea was still when they came upon the next island, vast, silent, and green in its loneliness. It rose from the horizon like a sleeping creature, its cliffs washed smooth by centuries of wind. The water around it shimmered softly, a clear mirror for the pale morning sky. Odysseus stood at the bow, shading his eyes. The air smelled faintly of pine and salt, with a trace of smoke carried from inland, not thick like cities, but thin, like hearth fires burning quietly in solitude. The island looked untouched by men. No harbors, no fields, no sound of bells or laughter, only the gentle rhythm of the sea. He felt the kind of hush that animals respect, the silence of something vast and unbothered, something that existed long before men began naming the world. The ship drifted into a shallow bay, framed by tall, pale rocks. Seabirds circled lazily above. The water here was crystalline, smooth as glass. so shallow they could see fish darting through patches of seaweed below. They halted near a small stretch of beach covered in fine white sand and bits of coral. The air hung heavy with quiet. The men spoke in hushed voices, as though the island might overhear them. A few went ashore, their footsteps soft on the sand. They found the remains of old paths winding through tall grass, not roads, just tracks formed by hooves or heavy treading feet. The land was green and wild, dotted with olive trees grown tall and untended. Wild goats grazed freely along the cliffs, their coats catching the sunlight in flashes of gold. The absence of smoke or boundary walls told Odysseus that this was no place of farmers or shepherds. It belonged to creatures who needed no company. They walked inland, through slopes of long grass and scattered boulders. The air grew warmer, and the smell of earth thickened. Soon, among low hills, they found caverns, deep mouths in the rock, wide enough for a ship to enter if the sea had reached them. From within these hollows came faint echoes, the bleat of animals, the roll of large stones moving slowly, and once, a sound that might have been a voice, deep, solitary, unconcerned. The men exchanged looks. Odysseus raised a hand for silence. It was not fear in him, only awareness, that they had crossed into a world older and slower than their own. They followed a small stream that trickled from the mountains, leading toward a sloping meadow where the grass grew thick around a single immense cave. Outside it, fires had recently burned. Ashes still glowed faintly red. Nearby stood tall baskets woven from reeds, filled with cheeses and round loaves as large as helmets. Everything here was large, the tools, the vessels, the footprints embedded in the soil. The men whispered among themselves. Some laughed nervously, others stared wide-eyed. Odysseus stepped forward, his hand tracing the edge of one of the baskets. The craftsmanship was rough but sure, the work of someone strong and self-sufficient. Inside the cave, shadows pooled thick as dusk. The air was cool and smelled of milk and damp stone. Goats bleated softly deeper within, their bells chiming faintly when they moved. Rows of earthen jars lined the walls, half filled with curds and oil. On the ground, straw beds were laid as though for resting cattle, or beings much larger. Odysseus crouched near the entrance, studying the light flickering across the floor. The cave opened toward the sea, allowing the distant sound of water to echo faintly inside. He felt the stillness of a life lived entirely apart from the world, a quiet existence, untamed but not cruel. "This is no land of men," one sailor murmured. Odysseus nodded. "Nor of gods," he answered softly. "Something between." They explored carefully, taking little, disturbing less. But curiosity tugged at them like a slow tide. On a flat stone near the center of the chamber lay pieces of half-carved wood, large handles and crude ornaments, and next to them, a great stone bowl filled with milk, the scent of it fresh, warm. Whoever lived here would return soon. Odysseus knew that much. He gestured for his men to step back toward the light, to wait in silence. Curiosity, too, had to obey patience. As the sun tilted lower, long shadows reached across the meadow, and the wind shifted. It carried with it the unmistakable sound of movement, steady, slow, deliberate footsteps, heavy as falling logs. The creature that appeared at the bend of the field did not move like a monster, but like a farmer returning home. On his shoulder, he carried a bundle of wood. Around him followed his flock, goats bleating softly as they crossed the stones. His shape was large, larger than any man's, yet oddly graceful in motion, as though each step carried a simple certainty of place. When he entered the cave, the air darkened. The men shrank back deeper into shadows, their breath caught between awe and unease. He set down his bundle, sealed the entrance with a great boulder, and tended to his animals with practiced ease, milking them one by one, humming in a tone that seemed to echo through the whole chamber. It was a sound older than language, a song meant not for others, but for solitude. Odysseus watched in silence, noting everything. How the creature's single eye glowed faintly in lamplight, how he moved with the slow rhythm of a hermit who had never known company. There was no malice in his actions, only instinct, habit, the calm of isolation. When at last he finished, he sat near the fire he lit, and began to shape cheese from the curdled milk. pressing it into large baskets. Outside, the sea murmured faintly through the stone walls. Inside, nothing stirred but the low sigh of smoke. Odysseus thought briefly of home, how Penelope churned butter in the mornings, how life in Ithaca followed small, predictable rituals, not so different from this. The scale alone had changed, not the soul of the act. For a time, he forgot caution. He simply observed, as if watching a fragment of creation left unfinished by the gods, living quietly here at the edge of the world. Later that night, when the Cyclops had eaten and settled into his bed of straw, his breathing filled the cave like the slow roll of distant surf. Odysseus whispered to his men. They must leave at dawn, but the entrance lay sealed with a great stone, far too heavy to shift. They waited in darkness, calm yet alert, while the embers pulsed in dim crimson light. The hours stretched long, muffled, dreamlike. The scent of wool, smoke, and salt mingled into one steady rhythm. Outside, waves lapped faintly against the shore. Inside, the giant slept, a living part of the mountain itself. When morning came, birds stirred in the distance, their songs soft but bright. The Cyclops rose, went about his work, and finally rolled the stone aside to release his animals. He stepped into the light, tall and quiet, his shadow long upon the grass. Odysseus watched the moment with quiet wonder. For all his cunning, for all his victories, it was this, the sight of a being completely at peace in its solitude, that humbled him most. The men waited until the steps faded into distance. Then, carefully, silently, they moved the smaller stones to create a gap just narrow enough to crawl through. Outside, the day was full of light. The world seemed enormous again. They hurried down the meadow toward the shore, hearts steady, breaths deep with relief. The sea waited, forgiving, bright and unending. The ship rocked softly, eager to leave. They pushed it from the sand, raised the sail, and drifted free once more. Days passed after the island of the Cyclops, and the sea grew soft again, obedient, as if resting after a long breath. The sails filled smoothly. The water parted without resistance. The men began to smile once more. Days of sun followed, and the sea, for a time, behaved like a friend. Then, one morning, the horizon changed. It didn't rise sharp or clear. Instead, it stretched upward like vapor. Pale walls of cloud formed distant golden arches. The wind, which had been calm, began to hum softly, circling around itself in a way that felt playful, not hostile. Odysseus steered toward it cautiously, his eyes narrowing as the sky shimmered. The scent in the air was like no place he had known, clean and light, almost sweet. As they came closer, the water brightened, reflecting a mirage of floating cliffs and shining towers rising straight out of the sea. It was no solid island, not stone, not earth, but a hovering world of air, sustained by wind itself. Long spiral stairways seemed to hang between sky and sea, their edges invisible. Above them, banners rippled, and among them figures moved lightly, half-transparent in the sun. Odysseus knew then that they had found Aeolus, the keeper of the winds, the lord who listened to the voice of every storm. From the deck, he could feel the breath of 1,000 unseen currents sweeping across his face, warm and cool by turns, brushing like the fingers of invisible hands. The air itself hummed softly with a low, musical vibration, as though the island's foundations were made of sound. When they landed, the cliffs beneath their feet felt light, almost hollow, as though waves flowed through them instead of stone. A great gate stood before them, carved entirely from shining copper. Every few heartbeats, it seemed to pulse faintly, opening slightly to let out a sigh of air, warm one moment, cold the next. Guards met them, wearing long robes that fluttered constantly, even when there was no visible wind. Their faces were pale and kind, their voices calm and resonant, like the hush before dawn. When they led Odysseus to Aeolus's hall, he found it less a palace than a chamber open to the sky. Curtains of silk drifted in slow motion, shifting hues with the sunlight. Beneath them, the Lord of the Winds sat upon a chair carved from crystal, a crown of feathers resting on his brow. His eyes glowed faintly, reflecting not his thoughts, but the movement of clouds above. Odysseus bowed low and spoke of his journey, of Troy, of storms, of wandering. Aeolus listened, silent and composed, the currents around him swirling slowly in visible spirals, lifting loose threads of fabric and small petals from the floor. When Odysseus finished, Aeolus smiled faintly. "The winds know your story," he said. His voice was so gentle it barely disturbed the air. "They have carried it across waves and mountains alike. You seek the way home, and though no man commands the winds, one may sometimes borrow their grace." He rose and moved toward a large bronze chest near the edge of the hall. Its surface was engraved with coiling streams and cloud patterns that seemed to shift when one looked too long. From within it, Aeolus drew out a great leather bag, bound tight with a silver cord. The bag pulsed faintly, as if something alive stirred within. "In this are the winds that would have led you astray," Aeolus said softly. "Storms that burn ships, gales that scatter stars. I have bound them for you, all but the one that blows toward home. Keep it sealed, Odysseus. Guard it as you would your life." He placed the bag into Odysseus's hands, and instantly it felt heavy, almost impossibly so, though it contained nothing but air. Odysseus bowed deeply again, grateful beyond words. The sailors, when they learned of the gift, whispered in awe. They slept that night upon the floating island, lulled by the soft chorus of breezes drifting through golden chimes suspended overhead. At dawn, they departed with the sound of Aeolus's voice following them, not a command, but a blessing. "May the gentlest breath carry you swiftly home." The sea obeyed. For 9 days, the voyage was perfect. The same wind blew steadily behind them, soft and deliberate. The waves bent backward as if bowing to their passing. Even the gulls seemed to glide slower, content. Odysseus held the bag carefully within his tent, resting his hand upon it as if guarding a sacred flame. When the men grew tired, he took the rudder himself. The stars turned slowly above, bright, constant, benevolent. Each morning, the horizon grew clearer. The air carried new scents: thyme, cedar, soil, the smell of land. Ithaca was near enough that they could almost taste it, but proximity can dull the mind. Men who have seen too much hardship begin to doubt the simplicity of peace. And so, on the 10th night, while Odysseus finally slept, exhausted, murmuring in his dream about home, 2 sailors whispered near the mast. They had seen the bag for days now. The rich leather, the careful way their captain guarded it, never letting anyone touch or open it. Their thoughts, dulled by fatigue and fever dreams of treasure, began to twist their reason. When the moonlight fell upon the deck, glimmering faintly over the bound bag, they thought they saw coins shining through it, golden light gleaming from within. Quietly, they untied the silver cord. It was not gold that fled from the bag, but silence. The hush of peace vanished as a low hum filled the air, followed by a roar like the deep cry of a giant awakening. The winds escaped in every direction, wild and desperate to return to their native sky. The ship spun tilted, the sails snapping violently though no storm clouds formed above. Only wind, in its purest form, free again. Odysseus woke instantly, his heart steady even as the deck pitched under him. He saw the open bag at his feet, the silver cord trailing loose, and understood without anger, only with a deep, quiet sadness. He ordered the sails drawn down and ropes tightened. The men struggled for hours, their arms aching, the sea churning beneath them. When at last the winds calmed, they found themselves adrift, the stars no longer familiar above them. The path home was gone. Odysseus sat in silence, the bag now lifeless beside him. His men hung their heads in shame, though he spoke no reproach. The sea around them shimmered faintly in moonlight, its surface smoothing once more. They had lost the gift, the guiding breath, but not the voyage itself. The sea would always wait. They drifted for many nights, and though the men whispered of their mistake, Odysseus remained calm. He sat at the prow each evening, watching the horizon for movement, feeling for any hint of a new breeze. And slowly, faint currents found them again. The sea forgave, as it always did. The stars realigned above, quiet and certain. And as dawn returned, Odysseus felt a renewed understanding that every gift, even one divine, is only as strong as the patience that guards it. The wind that returned was gentle and true, not the guiding gust that had once pushed them home, but something humbler, wiser. It whispered not of safe harbor, but but of endurance. And Odysseus, ever the student of quiet lessons, accepted it with gratitude. By evening, the ship moved steadily again, slow but sure. The scent of unknown lands floated ahead. The wanderer watched the dying sun spread rose and gold across the sea, and smiled faintly into the wind that no longer obeyed him but still kept him company. Far behind, Aeolus's floating island shimmered faintly in clouds, already fading into myth. And once more, Odysseus sailed on, patient, listening, letting the sea decide when to speak next. His sea had grown narrow for days, threading between lands like a blue ribbon pulled taut between the fingers of the gods. The wind fell silent. The ship drifted slowly, its sails loose, its oars moving in careful rhythm. On the horizon, cliffs rose, tall and pale, their peaks touched by clouds. The water around them darkened into deep jade, still and glassy. The air smelled faintly of stone and rain. As they approached, the cliffs drew closer until they formed two long walls of rock, standing side by side like twin guardians. The passage between them was strange, too calm, too deep. Even the waves refused to break aloud. They only trembled gently against the sides of the ship. Odysseus watched the towering entrance in silence. The space beyond was hidden in a thin, amber haze. The stillness had a kind of gravity, as though the world inside the harbor was listening. Beyond the narrow gate, the world opened unexpectedly. The passage widened into a circular bay halfway, enclosed by softly sloping hills. The water here was milk blue, so calm that every ship and cloud reflected perfectly. The place looked as though no hand had disturbed it for centuries. But what caught their eyes was not grandeur, it was stillness. No sound of birds, no sign of wind. The shoreline lay scattered with massive stones that once might have been walls or foundations. The ruins stood partly sunken, half reclaimed by moss and time. Small rivers ran down from the hillsides, winding through overgrowth, shimmering faintly like threads of glass. And yet, for all its beauty, the bay felt forgotten, like some god's courtyard abandoned before memory began. Odysseus ordered the anchor drop near the center. The sound of chain meeting water echoed longer than it should have. It was as though the bay itself absorbed the noise, turning it into silence again. They sat quietly for a while, taking in the scene. Some of the men smiled, relieved to find a place so sheltered. Others watched the cliffs with unease. The stillness, though soft, pressed too close on the heart. Odysseus felt it too, not fear but awe, the kind one feels in ancient ruins or quiet temples when even the wind dares not whisper. He decided to send a few men to shore to explore, to seek fresh water or fruit. He told them to move gently, to speak with care, to touch nothing they did not understand. When the men reached land, they found terraces once shaped by human hands, garden walls long since crumbled, stairways leading nowhere. Between them grew tall grasses and wildflowers in colors both familiar and strange. Amber petals, silver stalks, lavender light that seemed to glow faintly at dusk. Broken pottery lay buried in soil, its painted lines faded to dust. Here and there stood huge gates carved from stone, so large that even 3 men could not have spanned one archway hand to hand. The builders who once lived here must have been giants, not in form, perhaps, but in vision. Farther inland, streams bubbled between reed beds. Small ripples made quiet music against the shore. The air carried the pleasant smell of minerals and moss. The few men who bent to drink found the water sweet and cold, as if drawn from some ancient spring deep under the mountain. They filled their jars with gratitude, their voices softer now. When they looked farther into the valley, they saw faint shapes moving, not men, not beasts, but figures half hidden by the drifting haze. Tall shadows bending forward to lift stones or gather water in jars the size of wine casks. Their movements were slow and solemn. The sailors froze, uncertain. These shapes did not seem hostile. They moved deliberately but silently, never turning their faces. When one lifted its head, the air shimmered faintly around it, as if sunlight refracted through glass. Odysseus, waiting aboard the ship, saw the forms too through the rising haze at the harbor's far side. They seemed peaceful, almost scenic, like memories drifting through an old dream. Yet something in his heart stirred, an understanding that perhaps some stories live only for those who look too closely. He called the men back softly. They obeyed, eager to return but glancing behind as if reluctant to leave what they could not grasp. When they reached the ship, they told of large beings tending to ruins, their gestures slow, their voices absent. None spoke directly, none threatened, and yet the world itself seemed shaped to their measure. Odysseus listened without surprise. "It is an old law of the sea," he said quietly. "We find wonders when we seek safety, and in safety we must never linger." The crew nodded, though their eyes kept wandering toward the pale shore. They left at dawn. The sea outside the bay was calm still, though less perfect now. A faint wind trailed behind them, like breath released at last from long-held patience. As they passed again between the stone walls of the entrance, Odysseus looked back. The mist was rising. The figures were gone. The ruins shone dimly like bones of the world beneath newborn sunlight. It seemed then that all things men's cities sees vanished the same way, slowly, beautifully, without noise. They sailed on through calm water. The cliffs gave way to wide-open seas once again. The men began to talk softly, their minds eased by the fading beauty behind them. Some thought the land enchanted. Others said it had been cursed. Odysseus said nothing. He knew that not all wonder is meant to be understood. Days later, when stars emerged in new constellations, he thought again of the silent shapes and the vast, empty city. Was it ever meant for men to see? Perhaps it had lingered in this forgotten corner of the world only for the chance to be witnessed one final time, before vanishing beneath the same waves that erase all memory. That night, the sea was perfectly smooth. The ship glided forward like an afterthought in the dreaming of gods. The crew slept early. Only Odysseus remained awake, the soft reflection of starlight caught in his eyes. He imagined that somewhere deep below, under layers of coral and sand, lay cities still breathing quietly, their towers alive in memory alone. The world, he thought, must be made of places like that, half real, half myth, places that exist only when one looks, and fade the moment one turns away. The sails hung slack. The sea held them in something close to sleep, and when Odysseus finally closed his eyes, the image of that quiet harbor still lingered, vast, golden, and perfectly still, waiting in its eternal morning. The next dawn found them far from the land, surrounded only by water and sky. The air was lighter, freer, as though something old had been released back into the wind. The crew awoke rested, their hearts subdued yet calm. The harbor faded into mist behind the horizon, and none spoke of it again. But Odysseus, gazing ahead toward the pale bloom of sunrise, whispered softly to himself, to no one else, "There are places the world remembers, even when we forget." And the sea, in answer, gave a single quiet sigh, and carried him onward. The sea had turned to silk again, smooth and warm beneath a sky of endless peach. Days blurred into one another until direction lost all meaning. The men grew quiet, their eyes heavy with the weight of wandering. Even the oars dipped slower now, as though reluctant to disturb the water's calm. One evening, as the sun melted into honey across the waves, a faint island appeared, not sharp or rocky, but soft-edged, wrapped in perpetual mist. Tall cypress trees rose like dark feathers against the glow, and from somewhere within came the scent of wood smoke and wild herbs, rosemary, lavender, thyme blooming in impossible abundance. The air felt different here, lighter, sweeter, as though every breath carried a promise of rest. Odysseus stood at the prow, his hand trailing in the water. The island called not with urgency, but with the gentle pull of home. They landed on a beach of fine silver sand, where waves barely whispered against pebbles worn smooth as river stones. Paths wound upward through meadows heavy with flowers, poppies nodding sleepily, asphodel glowing faintly in twilight. The world here seemed painted in halftones, every color softened by an unseen hand. Odysseus sent a few men ahead to explore, caution still guiding his steps. They followed a winding path through olive groves where birds sang in slow, liquid notes. The air grew warmer, fragrant with cooking spices and fresh bread. Stone walls appeared, draped in flowering vines, leading to a clearing where a low house stood. Not a palace, but a home of honey-colored stone, its roof blooming with wild roses. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Windows glowed with soft amber light. Animals moved freely through the gardens, wolves with gentle eyes, lions stretching lazily in the grass, all watching the newcomers with calm curiosity rather than threat. A woman appeared at the doorway, tall, graceful, her hair falling in auburn waves, dressed in flowing white linen that caught the fading sunlight. Her movements were unhurried, her smile both welcoming and knowing. This was Circe, goddess of this place, weaver of air and earth. She offered them seats beneath a spreading fig tree heavy with fruit. Wine appeared in silver cups, bread still warm from the oven, cheese soft as clouds. The men ate, and as they did, a gentle drowsiness settled over them, not alarming, but comforting, like sinking into deep feather mattresses after long travel. Odysseus waited at the shore, watching the sky deepen to indigo. When his men did not return, a quiet unease stirred within him, not fear, but the awareness that some places reshape those who enter them. He climbed the path alone, following the glow of Circe's house through gathering twilight. The animals parted for him as he approached, their eyes reflecting moonlight like still ponds. Circe met him at the threshold, her gaze clear and unafraid. "Your men rest," she said simply, her voice like wind through linen curtains. "They've earned peace." She led him inside to a hall filled with soft light, beeswax candles flickering on bronze stands, tapestries woven with scenes of forests and rivers flowing endlessly. The air smelled of cedarwood and dried lavender. His men lay sleeping peacefully on cushioned benches, their faces smooth, their breathing deep and even. Circe touched his arm lightly. "They are safe, transformed only by rest." She showed him a small golden cup. "Drink and see for yourself." Odysseus accepted, trusting the calm of her presence. The wine was cool, tasting of summer meadows and ripe stone fruit. Warmth spread through him, not intoxication, but clarity, as though years of weariness dissolved in a single breath. He understood then that Circe offered not deception, but truth, the truth of rest after endless striving. Days became weeks on the island, though time lost meaning. Mornings began with mist clinging to the cypresses, the air crisp with dew. Circe moved through her gardens like part of the landscape itself, gathering herbs, tending roses, speaking softly to her animals as they followed her in quiet procession. Odysseus joined her routines, learning the island's gentle rhythm. He helped press olives for oil, their golden drops catching sunlight in clay bowls. He walked with her through meadows where asphodel bloomed eternally, their pale flowers glowing like captured moonlight. The house filled with simple abundance, bread baked with wild honey, fish caught from silver streams, cheeses wrapped in fig leaves. Evenings gathered around the hearth where Circe spun fine thread by firelight. The animals curled at her feet like contented dogs. Odysseus told stories of Troy, of Ithaca, of winds and wanderings. She listened without judgment, her presence steady as the tides. One night, as rain pattered softly on the roof, she taught him the language of roots and leaves, how certain plants opened the heart, others quieted restless dreams. Her hands moved with graceful certainty, crushing dried blossoms between stone mortars, blending scents that filled the air with calm. The men, restored from their long sleep, worked the gardens and mended their ship with unhurried hands. They no longer dreamed of haste. The island had taught them patience, the kind that blooms slowly, like wild roses against stone. Yet Odysseus felt the pull of home growing stronger, like a tide rising beneath calm waters. One evening, as they walked along a cliff path overlooking the sea, he spoke of Penelope, of Telemachus now growing tall, of Laertes tending his ancient vines. Circe listened without bitterness. "All islands end," she said softly. "Even this one." She led him to a hidden grotto where a spring bubbled clear and cold. From it she drew water into a silver bowl, adding sacred herbs that glowed faintly as they dissolved. "Drink this, and the way forward will open," she whispered. Her fingers brushed his as she handed him the bowl. In that touch lingered both farewell and blessing, the quiet ache of things that must end to begin again. The next morning dawned clear. The mist burned away by perfect light. The men gathered supplies, dried fruit, cheeses, amphorae of wine, and healing salves. Circe stood at the shore as they boarded, her white gown catching the breeze. She raised her hands in gentle farewell, and the animals gathered behind her, watching silently. Odysseus lingered longest. "You gave us more than rest," he said. She smiled, her eyes reflecting the sea. "Rest was only the beginning. Carry it with you." As the ship pulled away, her island shrank slowly behind them. First the house vanished among trees, then the cliffs, until only a faint green smudge remained against endless blue. The wind that filled their sails felt different now, lighter, steadier, infused with the island's calm. For days after, the men spoke little, each carrying the island's peace within. They no longer quarreled over course or rations. Meals became rituals of gratitude, bread broken slowly, wine poured with reverence. Odysseus often stood at the prow, watching the horizon with new clarity. Circe had shown him that wandering need not be punishment, that islands exist not merely to be left, but to be carried forward in memory. He thought of her house glowing through twilight mist, of lions stretching in afternoon sun, of the taste of honeyed bread by firelight. These were not distractions from home, but companions to the journey, soft lights to guide through coming darkness. The sea breathed evenly beneath them, patient as an old friend. Stars emerged each night with familiar comfort, and somewhere ahead, through currents yet uncharted, Ithaca waited, patient as Circe's gardens, steady as her hearth fire glow. One evening, as the first stars appeared, Odysseus whispered to the wind, "Thank you for the resting place." The sail fluttered gently in answer, and the ship glided forward, restored, whole, ready once more for whatever soft wonders or quiet trials lay beyond the circle of the sea. The sea grew cooler as days passed, the wind carrying a faint chill like breath from distant caves. Circe's island had faded into memory, its warmth lingering only in dreams. Now the horizon held a somber beauty, skies of deep slate, waters turning indigo, the air heavy with the scent of stone and salt. One evening, as twilight deepened into endless gray, Circe's final words echoed in Odysseus' mind. "Before home calls truly, you must look below." She had spoken of a place beyond life's light, where shades gathered like mist at dawn, not to frighten, but to whisper truths long held in silence. The men felt the change too. Their voices softened, laughter came rarely. The ship drifted toward a jagged coast, where cliffs plunged straight into black water, their faces worn smooth by unseen tides. No bird circled here. Only the slow lap of waves filled the quiet. Odysseus steered into a narrow cove, its entrance framed by two great rocks like silent sentinels. Beyond lay a river mouth, sluggish and dark, flowing not to sea but inward, as if pulled by the earth's own breath. This was the place, the threshold where the living paused to hear the forgotten speak. They beached the ship on pale gravel that crunched softly underfoot. Odysseus chose a small group to follow, men whose hearts carried quiet strength, untouched by fear. Each held a torch wrapped in pitch, its flame steady against the damp wind. They carried a black ram from the flock, its wool soft as evening clouds, and a ewe beside it, offerings for the unseen powers that guarded the deep. The path wound downward through fissures in the rock, steps worn hollow by countless feet before them. The air cooled steadily, filled with the mineral scent of underground springs. Torchlight danced on walls veined with crystal, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. No sound but their breathing and the distant murmur of water. The world above faded sun, sea, sky, until only descent remained, slow and reverent, like sinking into the earth's oldest dream. Deeper still, the passage opened into caverns vast as halls. Here the river flowed black and silent, its surface unbroken. Odysseus paused, feeling the weight of countless lives pressing gently from all sides. He drew his sword not for protection, but to mark the boundary, steel between worlds, gleaming faintly in torch glow. They dug a small pit and poured libations, honeyed milk first, then sweet wine, water clear as tears. The animals were led forward, their blood spilling warm into the earth. A soft sighing filled the air, like wind through dry reeds. Then they came, The shades. They rose first as vapor, thin and drifting, then gathered form, translucent figures clothed in robes of dusk, their faces calm, eyes distant yet knowing. No anger, no clamor, only quiet movement, like leaves settling after autumn wind. They drank the blood offered, and memory returned to them softly. Elpiner appeared first, a young sailor lost on Circe's island, his shade pale, but smiling faintly. "Bury me properly," he whispered, his voice like echo in an empty hall. Odysseus promised it gently, his heart heavy with forgotten debt. Then others, comrades from Troy, their wounds mere shadows now, faces smoothed by time beyond time. They spoke not of battles, but of small things, a shared meal by firelight, a song half remembered, the warmth of hands clasped in farewell. Their presence brought no chill, only the soft ache of lives paused mid-breath. Odysseus questioned them kindly, his voice steady as hearthstone. Mothers long gone appeared, their forms radiant despite the gloom, whispering of children grown tall. Heroes drifted by, Achilles serene in shadow, his fire banked to embers, Agamemnon peaceful, unburdened by crowns. Each shade lingered briefly, sharing fragments of wisdom. Patience outlives strength, memory outshines glory. Home waits beyond all wandering. Deeper in the gloom, ancient ones emerged, prophets with eyes like still ponds, their words flowing slow as honey. Tiresias appeared last, his staff tapping faintly on stone, blind eyes seeing farther than sight. He drank long from the pit, then spoke truths plain as river stones. The trials ahead, the cattle not to touch, the years yet to unfold. His voice carried no urgency, only certainty, like wind foretelling rain. Odysseus listened without stirring, each word etching into memory like carving on olive wood. Tiresias faded last, leaving the air warmer, clearer, as though burdens had been shared and lightened. Then came the throng, countless shades pressing gently forward, their murmurs blending into one endless hush. Mothers reached for phantom children, warriors clasped old spears of mist, lovers stood hand in translucent hand. The cavern filled with quiet motion, faces passing like clouds across a midnight moon. Odysseus watched in reverent silence, sword steady in hand. No terror touched him, only wonder at the tapestry of souls, woven from joy and sorrow alike, drifting eternal in soft twilight. The river bore them onward, its current patient, unending. Time blurred here, hours or days, impossible to mark. Torches burned low, flames curling blue at edges. When the shades thinned at last, the air grew still again, heavy with peace. They retraced steps upward, the path seeming shorter now, lighter. Dawn waited above, pale rose touching cliff edges, seed-breathing silver sighs. The ram and Ulay still by the ship, their duty done. Odysseus gazed long at the river mouth before boarding, feeling the underworld's quiet settle into his bones like good earth after rain. The men spoke little of what they saw, each carrying private visions homeward. They sailed into morning light, sails filling with clean wind. No shade followed, the boundary held firm. For nights after, Odysseus dreamed gently, not of gloom, but faces luminous in shadow, whispers carrying across black water like lullabies from childhood. He understood now the gift of descent, to see life whole, from root to bloom, and know all paths lead softly home. The sea welcomed them back, waves gentler, sky wider, stars that night burned clearer, as though polished by underworld winds. Circe's words proved true. The journey below had not stolen light, but gathered it, storing peace against coming storms. Image prompt 5. Greek ships sailing away from underworld cliffs under rosy dawn sky. Odysseus standing at prow gazing thoughtfully westward. Pale mist lingering over dark river entrance. Early 20th century maritime mythological painting. Soft peach and deep blue palette. Hopeful serenity. AR 16:9. Days turned serene once more. The ship gliding westward with renewed purpose. The men moved with quiet confidence, their fears dissolved in cavern hush. Meals shared by firelight carried new weight. Bread broken reverently, wine poured like libation. Odysseus often stood alone at night, tracing constellations that Tiresias had named. The dead, he thought, do not haunt, they guide. their whispers woven into wind and wave. Ithaca drew nearer, not by haste, but by patient current. One evening, as stars bloomed thick overhead, he spoke softly to the sea. "We have seen the threshold. Now let us cross to morning." The water sighed in answer, silver ripples spreading endless, and the long voyage breathed onward, wiser, deeper, wrapped in the gentle certainty that even shadows serve the light. After the underworld's quiet revelations, the sea seemed to exhale in relief, its waves softening to a rhythmic cradle. Days passed in gentle procession, the ship gliding westward under skies of flawless azure. The men moved with newfound serenity, their conversations hushed, as if carrying fragile truths from caverns below. Odysseus often stood alone at the prow, tracing the horizon's faint curve, Tiresias' words echoing softly in memory like distant bells. Circe's island reappeared not by chance, but by the sea's patient design, green cliffs emerging from dawn mist like a half-remembered dream. The cypress trees stood sentinel as before, their dark branches etched against peach-colored sky. Smoke rose lazily from her chimney, carrying scents of fresh thyme, baking bread, and sun-warmed lavender across the silver bay. The air felt thicker here, sweeter, wrapping around the ship like welcoming arms. Odysseus felt no astonishment at the return. Islands like hers called twice, once to heal, once to send forth equipped. The crew rowed ashore in reverent silence, faces calm, each man bearing the underworld's subtle polish, eyes clearer, steps steadier. Circe waited on the silver sand beach, her flowing white gown catching the breeze. Tame lions and wolves gathered like peaceful courtiers at her feet. She smiled with knowing warmth, as if timing their arrival to the precise moment of sunrise. They embraced her hospitality without question, settling into routines that felt like slipping into well-worn sandals. Mornings began with mist clinging to meadows, dew sparkling on asphodel blooms. Circe led them through herb gardens where rosemary and sage grew thick, their leaves releasing fragrance with every brush of fingers. Odysseus helped press olives in stone troughs, golden oil pooling slowly in clay bowls, catching sunlight like captured stars. The work was meditative, hands moving in unison with the island's slow pulse. Afternoons unfolded in shaded groves, where the men mended sails and sharpened oars, while Circe spun fine thread by a bubbling stream. Her animals wandered freely, a lion stretching languidly in grass, wolves dozing with paws tucked neatly, all watching newcomers with gentle curiosity. Evenings gathered in her honeystone hall, beeswax candles flickering on bronze stands, tapestries glowing with woven scenes of eternal forests and meandering rivers. Meals appeared as if by magic, bread still warm from clay ovens, cheeses wrapped in fig leaves, fish roasted with wild herbs, honeyed wine poured from silver amphorae. Conversation flowed soft as the hearth fires crackled, stories of underworld shades blending with Circe's tales of ancient winds and blooming spells. One golden twilight, as lavender light spilled across wildflower meadows, Circe drew Odysseus aside to a cliff path overlooking endless sea. Waves whispered far below, foam tracing silver patterns on dark rocks. The air hummed faintly with unseen chimes. "The path ahead holds songs," she murmured, her voice weaving with wind like linen threads. Not of battle or glory, but deeper magic, melodies that mirror the soul's hidden harbors, pulling like moon on tide. She led him to a hidden grotto where crystal-clear springs bubbled over smooth pebbles. From sacred pouches, she drew beeswax, softened by her touch, weaving it deftly into the men's ears, sealing sound while leaving vision pure. Her fingers worked with graceful certainty, each motion a quiet blessing. For Odysseus alone, she fashioned strong ropes from unyielding flax, binding them securely around his chest and knotting to the mast with sailor's precision. "Hear if destiny calls," she whispered, eyes meeting his with steady light. "But let oak would cradle you when longing swells like storm." Her touch lingered on the knots, part farewell, part ward, carrying the quiet ache of inevitable parting. That night, rain pattered softly on her rose-covered roof, a lullaby sealing preparations. The men slept deeply, dreams sweetened by island air. Odysseus lay awake briefly, listening to droplets chase across tiles, feeling Circe's presence nearby like hearth warmth. Dawn broke flawless, sails filling with clean westerlies as they pushed from shore. Circe stood long on the cliff, white silhouette against emerald hills. Animals gathered motionless behind her. Her island shrank gradually, house vanishing among cypresses, cliffs folding into sea haze. Yet its essence lingered in every breath, every knot. Days flowed in perfect rhythm afterward, sea turning to flawless glass under cloudless vault. Then transformation came suddenly, air thickening with unearthly sweetness, fragrance of 1,000 unseen gardens blooming in harmony. Horizon wavered like heat shimmer, and sound emerged, not crashing surf, but melody, pure crystalline, threading through water like spun silver filaments. The siren's domain materialized gradually. Jagged rocks swathed in cascading vines heavy with luminous blossoms, pale cliffs pocked with natural ledges, were ethereal figures, perched like living statues. They were exquisite, not in fierce allure, but delicate melancholy, forms blending human grace with sea mist translucence, hair flowing endless as foam trails. Perched on tide-worn stone, they sang instrumentless, voices rising in flawless polyphony, slow, hypnotic, each sustained note lingering like twilight's afterglow. No violence marked their call, only irresistible truth. The song evoked home's deepest essence, hearth fires crackling soft on winter evenings, children's laughter echoing through sun-dappled olive groves, taste of fresh bread steaming from Penelope's clay ovens, loom's rhythmic tap promising patient welcome. It painted Ithaca in audible light, waves lapping ancestral shores, vineyard leaves rustling under Laertes' careful hands, Telemachus' voice deepening with manhood's first questions. Every phrase tailored itself to the listener's soul, weaving personal tapestries of belonging. Odysseus heard crystalline perfection, waxed powerless against such purity. Longing cascaded through him, profound as ocean abysses, not frantic but inexorable, tugging heartstrings like gentlest undertow. He strained against ropes with quiet fervor, body arching gracefully, eyes locked on singers weaving his life's mosaic in sound. Their faces held ancient compassion, voices God forged to echo every wanderer's unspoken yearnings, no two auditors receiving identical enchantment. Crew rode oblivious, faces placid, ears sealed against spell. Oars plunged rhythmic into glassy depths, hull slicing clean furrows through enchanted waters. Odysseus wept without sound, tears carving glistening paths down sun-bronzed cheeks. Yet resolve endured, anchored by Circe's flawless knots, fortified by underworld's shadowed verities. Song deepened enchantingly, pledging eternal harbor on those luminous shores where time suspended, every grief dissolving in perpetual violet dusk. Visions cascaded, Telemachus racing joyfully across sun-gilded fields, Penelope's smile capturing hearth-lamplit warmth, palace halls resonant with tranquil feasting and lyre song. Sirens' gazes bridged foaming straits, melody modulating to his essence. One voice vowing reunion's embrace, another eternal respite beyond toil, a third wisdom distilled through solitary seas. Ship aligned parallel to cliffs at peril's zenith, Odysseus' form taut against bonds, ropes humming faint under pressure, mast unyielding as sacred olive. Singers inclined forward in unison, voices cresting in sublime crescendo, flawless, soul-piercing, inexorable. Oars persisted metronomic, propelling past temptation's core. Distance gradually diluted harmony. Tones thinned to wistful echoes, merging with breeze and swell. Cliffs receded, all diminishing to verdant mirage against boundless azure. Odysseus slumped into ropes, spent yet intact, Circe's foresight vindicated triumphant. Freed finally under emerging stars, he clasped each rower in profound gratitude, arms strong around salt-weary shoulders. Wax discarded, ordinary sea murmur resumed, gulls calling, canvas whispering, water sighing companionable. None recounted phantom harmonies. Certain songs remained solitary sacraments. Night descended benevolent, constellations unfurling vivid overhead. Odysseus reclined on deck, melodic fragments persisting like fading perfume on evening air. Comprehension dawned. Peril of unnamed beauty's veracity, truth binding fiercer than forged iron. Home residing not in geography, but fidelity carried longing through tempest. Sirens dissolved into legend astern, voices amalgamating with myriad zephyrs born eternally seaward. Circe's lay remoter, yet intimately proximate in spirit. Remembered refuge when allurement beckoned. Dawn ushered pristine breeze, sails ballooning buoyant. Labor chants arose subdued, voices harmonizing oceanic chorus. Odysseus resumed prow station, vista crystalline ahead, bearing dual symphonies forth, sirens haunting covenant, Circe's resolute benediction, paired beacons navigating encroaching gloaming. The sea had settled into profound tranquility after the sirens' fading echoes, its surface mirroring flawless skies, like polished bronze. Days unfolded in unhurried procession, sails drawing steady breath from compliant winds, the ship gliding westward as if cradled by invisible hands. Circe's provisions sustained them bountifully, olives glistening with golden oil, cheeses soft as dawn mist, dried figs bursting sweet upon the tongue. The men moved with deepened camaraderie, their labors rhythmic as ocean swell, conversations weaving tales of shades and songs into evening's gentle hush. Odysseus often stood at the prow during these serene passages, Tiresias' counsel resonating quietly within. The narrow strait ahead, flanked by twin perils, softened by moonlight. Not monsters of fong and fury, but ancient forces of sea and stone, demanding passage through perfect calm. The air grew cooler as they neared, carrying faint mineral tang of deep currents rising. Horizon narrowed imperceptibly, distant cliffs emerging as shadowed silhouettes against paling dusk. One evening, as sun dissolved into roseate splendor, Circe's prophetic words crystallized. Scylla claims 6 from every passing crew. Charybdis swallows ships whole, yet steady oars and unblinking gaze prevail. Odysseus gathered his men by firelight on deck, voice low and reassuring, recounting Tiresias' vision without embellishment. Faces reflected flame glow steadily. No panic stirred, only resolute acceptance forged in underworld shadow and Cyrenaic trial. Preparations unfolded methodically, oars polished smooth, ropes coiled precise, provisions lashed secure against caprice. Night deepened velvet, stars emerging one by one like lanterns hung by patient hands. The strait revealed itself gradually, leftward cliffs plunging sheer into churning abyss, where Charybdis exhaled monstrous breaths, waters funneling into yawning maw, then disgorging foaming tumult. Rightward jagged promontory, where Scylla lurked in cavernous heights, her forms indistinct yet watchful. Moonlight silvered the passage, transforming peril into spectral beauty, waves glowing phosphorescent, cliffs veined luminous in tidal gleam. Odysseus took the tiller himself, hands firm on worn wood, eyes tracing lunar path through narrowing channel. Crew rowed in perfect cadence, backs rising falling like breathing bellows, faces serene masks of concentration. Charybdis loomed first, colossal inhalation drawing ships sideways, waters tilting deck perilously, spray arcing crystalline under moon. Men leaned into oars with quiet ferocity, muscles corded yet movements fluid, vessel heeling gracefully against voracious pull. Odysseus steered precise, voice murmuring encouragement soft as prayer. Steady breath, brothers. Sea yields to patience. The maelstrom crested, then exhaled in roaring exhalation, spume cascading like silver waterfalls, ship surfing crest perilously close to yawning void. Deck shuddered, timbers groaning symphonic protest, yet bonds held, craftsmanship enduring. As tumult subsided, water smoothed momentarily, moonlight pooling tranquil on recovering swells. Men exhaled collective sigh. Glances exchanged wordless affirmation, rhythm unbroken. Scylla's domain approached stealthily, high cave mouth exhaling damp breath, shadows stirring within like restless smoke. Odysseus warned softly, gaze fixed upward where indistinct forms uncoiled, 6 serpentine necks emerging sinuous, heads questing with predatory grace rather than rage. Moonlight caught iridescent scales, eyes gleaming feral yet distant, ancient hunger guiding unerring strikes. No battle cry escaped lips, only focused exertion as necks darted lightning swift. First strike claimed silently, neck lancing downward, jaws engulfing one rower midstroke, vanishing upward into gloom. Crew faltered fractionally, eyes widening momentary horror, yet Odysseus' voice anchored them. Eyes forward, brothers. Honor their passage with perfect stroke. Second head followed seamless, third in fluid succession, each loss marked by faint splash, empty thwart remaining. Men rode through grief mechanical, faces etched determination, refusing vengeance's distraction. Fourth, fifth, sixth, inexorable toll exacted with mechanical precision. Scylla withdrawing sated into cavern hush. Ship emerged scarred yet seaworthy. 6 benches vacant ghosts of fallen brothers. Moonlight tracing empty oars like fallen spears. No lamentation erupted. Silence prevailed reverent, each survivor bearing loss communally. Odysseus relinquished tiller to trusted lieutenant, moving among men with quiet touch. Hand on shoulder, gaze meeting gaze, sharing unspoken bond of endurance. Deck wounds stanched methodically, blood mingling with spray, vessel steadying into open water beyond. Stars wheeled overhead indifferent, sea resuming gentle cradle. Charybdis' distant rumble faded sternward, Scylla's cave swallowed by night. Crew gathered remnants around single lantern, sharing wine from Circe's amphory, voices low recounting not tragedy, but brotherhood forged in transit. Fallen comrades invoked by name, their strokes remembered in rhythmic toasts, absence transforming into eternal presence. Dawn broke compassionate, painting horizon rose gold, air freshening with promise. Odysseus stood long at rail, contemplating vacant thwarts, understanding Tiresias' wisdom profounder now. Losses not punishments, but necessities refining homeward essence. Each fallen brother lightening vessel for Ithaca's harbor. Grief settled soft as morning mist, transmuting to gratitude for shared passage through fate's narrow gate. Days following unfolded meditative, crew leaner yet unbreakable, labors infused deeper purpose. Meals memorialized absent voices, portions set aside libation to see. Stories circulating of lost companions, quiet strengths. Eurylochus' steadfast humor, Perimedes' unerring rhythm, Elpenor's gentle songs. Odysseus wove their memories into nightly counsel, transforming sorrow into navigational star. Sea responded kinder, winds favorable, current supportive, as if saluting passage earned. Sunsets lingered protracted, stars emerging confidential, phosphorescence tracing hull nightly like guiding spirits. Men discovered amity profounder in scarcity, jests tempered wisdom, songs harmonizing oceanic lullaby. One tranquil eve, Odysseus addressed survivors by firelight. They row with us still, their strength in every stroke, their gaze in every star. We carry them home. Nod solemn, eyes reflecting flame truth, vessel lighter yet heavier with sacred cargo. Further westward, strait became legend whispered rather than shouted, trial alchemizing into testimony. Odysseus pondered pattern perennial, gods demanding not invulnerability but integrity through loss, refining wanderers like goldsmith tempers ore. Scylla and Charybdis emerged less devourers than thresholds, guardians exacting toll for maturation. Nights clarified stars patterns, Tiresias' map etched indelible. Ithaca pulsed tangible now, scent of olive groves haunting breeze. Loom song audible in wave whisper. Crews synchronized intuitive, labor's poetry in motion, vessel responding alive under hands tempered trial. Moon waned toward new, passage memory glowing constant. One dawn, first dolphins appeared portside, leaping joyous, Circe's blessing manifest. Men smiled genuine firsts and straight, hands trailing water communing with sea life. Odysseus watched horizon crystalline, heart buoyed equilibrium, loss balanced purpose, absence amplifying home's imminence. Voyage respired transformed, leaner, wiser, losses woven strength fabric. Sea cradled solicitous, diurnal thermals buoyant, nocturnal zephyrs confidential. Final constellations materialized eve-wise, Odysseus murmuring gratitude celestial. Passage earned, brothers born eternal. Canvas fluttered accordant, prow cleaving compliant furrow toward ancestral strand. Subsequent weeks cascaded purposeful, every dawn saluting survivors' resilience. Communal repast sacramental, loaves sundered remembrance, libations decanted fallen names. Odysseus fingered tiller-worn palms, scars talismans endurance prevailing caprice. Nocturnal soliloquies oceanic, trials temper, never shatter. Home welcomes whole hearts. Wave side concordance. Argent wakes scripting sacred itinerary. Ithaca magnetic proximate. Penelope's shuttle patient loom rhythm. Telemachus voice deepening hearth echo. Prolonged peregrination advanced luminous. Sagacious attrition. Resilient bereavement. Shadowed certitude even absence accelerates homecoming odyssey. Legends circulated protracted lunar vigils. Underworld apparitions revisited contemplative. Sirenic harmonies contemplated wistful. Celian toll honored dignified. Men discovered fraternity profundum. Jests mellowed sagacity. Choral labors oceanic symphony. Odysseus discerned divine architecture. Isles, straits distilling essence. Each encounter purifying Ithaca trajectory. Charybdis incarnated inexorability. Scylla discernment's price. Sea enfolded maternal. Phosphorescent dances hull tracing nightly. Diurnal luminosities effortless lofting. Penultimate eve. Emergent constellations confiding. Odysseus whispered Zephyr. Endured twin gates. Discovered singular path within. Sail rippled affirmative. Vessel cleaving destiny furrow. Odyssey respired ceaseless. Illuminated attrition. Fortified bereavement's embrace. Enshrouded shadowed certitude even diminishment hastens hath fire glow. After the straits shadowed passage. The sea unfolded into realms of endless light. Days lengthened under skies of burnished gold. The sun hanging perpetually at zenith. Bathing waves in liquid amber. Wind softened to whispers. Sails barely stirring as the ship drifted into a bay encircled by low green hills. The air hummed with warmth, scented by wild thyme and sun-ripened grass. No clouds marred the perfection. Time itself seemed suspended in eternal afternoon. Odysseus felt Tiresias' warning stir faintly. The island of Phrynacia, home to Helios' sacred cattle, herds under divine protection, where hunger tested obedience more fiercely than storm. Yet the light soothed all caution, wrapping the crew in drowsy contentment. They beached gently on sands warm as fresh bread, stretching limbs weary from oar and rope. Goats bleated softly from distant slopes. Streams chuckled over polished stones. The world here breathed abundance, without demand. Crews scattered peacefully, some gathering driftwood for evening fires, others trailing fingers in clear pools where fish darted golden. Odysseus wandered alone toward higher ground, olive staff tapping rhythmically on soft earth. Hills rolled gentle, dotted with ancient cypresses casting lacy shade. At summit, the island revealed itself, verdant meadows stretching boundless, rivers gleaming like veins of silver, and there the herds. Cattle of unearthly beauty grazed languid, coats shimmering white gold, horns curving graceful as new moons. They moved unhurried, cropping clover sweet as honey, watched by sacred birds wheeling lazy overhead. The animals exuded tranquility divine, eyes deep as forest pools, breath visible in faint steam rising from sun-kissed flanks. No fences confined them. Invisible boundaries held sacred flocks. Odysseus watched long from shaded knoll, feeling sun god's presence in every blade of grass bending heavy with dewless richness. Winds carried faint lowing, harmonious as lyre strings plucked soft. He understood temptation's subtlety, not frenzy, but slow erosion of what beneath paradise's weight. Descending, he found men gathered by streamside, faces flushed from sun and idleness. Eurylochus spoke first, voice thick with longing. Provisions dwindle, captain, yet abundance surrounds. Surely gods intend sharing. Others nodded, eyes tracing cattle's graceful movements across meadow. Odysseus recounted Tiresias' solemn charge. Touch not the herds upon pain of doom. Yet words dissolved in heat haze, promises fading like morning mist. Hunger gnawed subtle. Island's perfection mocked empty bellies. Days blurred into golden haze. Mornings dawned identical, sun cresting horizon instant full strength. Bird song swelling choral welcome. Crew foraged fruit and wild grain. Yet stores vanished swift under constant toil. Cattle continued sacred grazing. Milk scent wafting tempting on breeze. Their lowing blending lullaby-like with wave murmur. Odysseus patrolled meadows vigilantly, recounting underworld oaths by campfires. Yet even his resolve softened in relentless radiance. Sleep came dream-haunted, Penelope weaving endless, Telemachus calling faint across sunlit fields, hunger twisting familiar faces spectral. One windless afternoon, Eurylochus gathered conspirators by hidden cove. Gods feed men, not starve them amid plenty, he murmured, gesturing toward distant herd. Odysseus slumbered exhausted under cypress, staff across knees, dreams weaving Circe's warnings with Tiresias' gaze. Men moved stealthy through tall grass, hearts pounding quiet thunder. Cattle grazed oblivious, heads low in clover seas. Sacrificial rites hasty yet reverent. Libations poured sparkling streams. Prayers whispered contrite winds. Fire kindled swift, sacred flesh roasting on spits, fat dripping sizzle tempting. Aroma spread irresistible, weaving through island air like divine incense reversed. Men ate ravenous, faces alight forbidden ecstasy. Meat tender as ambrosia, juices rich as sun-trapped nectar. Odysseus woke to smoke trail rising, heart sinking leaden, yet powerless against deed complete. God's gaze felt tangible, sun intensifying accusatory. Cattle lowed mournful, birds wheeling tighter spirals overhead. Night fell reluctant, stars emerging hesitant through golden haze. Odysseus confronted men stern-side firelight, voice steady disappointment rather rage. Oath broken, doom summoned, yet blame shares all. Eurylochus bowed shamed, others silent guilt veiled. Sleep evaded collective, winds rose sighing warning, waves strengthening restless against shore. Dawn broke storm laden, skies blackening unnatural, thunder rumbling sun god's wrath. Storm erupted cataclysmic, yet measured, lightning forking precise, waves towering glassy mountains. Ships strained anchors desperate, timbers groaning supplication. Odysseus lashed himself mast firm, crew huddling terror-mute. Wind screamed vengeant, rain sheeting horizontal. Helios cursed manifest, vessel splintered methodical, planks yielding divine fury. Men washed overboard sequential, cries swallowed tumult. Eurylochus clung desperate final, gaze meeting Odysseus across foam. Apology unspoken brotherhood eternal. Odysseus alone survived, clutching mast shard as sea-tossed cradle. Storm raged ceaseless 9 days, sun god's anger unrelenting. 10th dawn, winds calmed sullen, depositing wanderer on distant Calypso's shore. Mast fragments drifted separate memorials. Island vanished stoneward, golden meadows mocking memory. He crawled sands exhaustion complete. Sun now enemy rather benevolent. Calypso found him thus, goddess weeping compassion salt-traced cheeks, wrapping wanderer healing furs. Yet Odysseus dreamed haunted, sacred cattle's eyes reproachful, Tiresias nodding foretold. Penelope's loom stilled silent. Hunger's lesson etched indelible, abundance test severest, where want absent, obedience weighs heavier than stone. Months passed solitary on Calypso's isle, yet Thrinacia haunted constant. Golden light tainted warning, cattle lowing phantom windswept nights. Odysseus wove tale meticulous for goddess audience, voice steady lesson learned. She nodded understanding divine caprice, stroking hair gentle maternal. Healing unfolded slow, body mending sun-salt wounds, spirit grappling sacrilege's shadow. Dreams evolved redemptive, fallen comrades rowing spectral beside sacred herds unmolested. Eurylochus smiling forgiveness across wave divide. Odysseus comprehended pattern celestial. Gods demand not perfection, but growth through fracture. Abundance schooling restraint profounder than famine. Thrinacia transformed memory not curse, but crucible, refining homeward essence purer. Calypso's caves echoed contemplation prolonged. Wanderer traced shoreline's dawn dusk, conversing waves contrite. Sea forgave gradual, dolphins returned playful, breezes sweetened apologetic. Sun resumed companionable, golden light benediction rather judgment. Odysseus stood straighter, gaze westward resolute, carrying Thrinacia's weight transformed buoyancy. One eve luminous, goddess approached soft-footed. Lesson mastered, winds favor departure. Odysseus bowed gratitude profound. Heart lighter burden transmuted wisdom. Raft constructed patient hands, provisions stacked maternal care. As prow kissed waves farewell, Thrinacia lingered horizon fringe. Golden beacon warning eternal. Sacred cattle grazing peaceful reminder obedience's quiet power. Voyage resumed humbled wiser. Sea cradling solicitous post-punishment. Solitary reflection deepened nightly star converse. Abundance disciplines. Restraint feeds eternal. Waves murmured accordant, phosphorescence guiding faithful. Ithaca pulsed visceral, olive oil sent haunting breezes, loom rhythm pulsing wave pulse. Prolonged Odyssey advanced luminous, chastened sacrilege, resilient atonement, shadowed certitude abundance accelerates, homecoming tempered. Legends circulated internal. Underworld apparitions revisited contemplative. Sirenic harmonies contemplated wistful. Celian told dignified. Solar heard sacramental. Solitude discovered fraternity profundum phantom. Jests internalized sagacity. Solitary labors oceanic symphony. Odysseus discerned architecture divine comprehensive. Isles, straits, pastures distilling essence purest. Encounters purifying Ithaca trajectory inexorable. Helios incarnated inexorability radiant. Cattle discernment's costliest lesson. Sea enfolded paternal. Nocturnal luminosities, hull tracing benedictory. Diurnal thermals, effortless ascension. Penultimate constellations confiding Eve serial. Odysseus whispered Zephyr. Feasted divine, discovered truer sustenance within. Sail rippled affirmative solitary. Vessel cleaving destiny furrow resolute. Odyssey respired ceaseless. Illuminated attrition cumulative. Fortified bereavement's manifold embrace. Enshrouded shadowed certitude diminishment hastens have fire glow. The storm's fury had stripped everything away. Ship, crew, provisions, leaving Odysseus alone upon a makeshift raft of broken mast and lashed planks. Calypso's distant shore faded into memory as relentless waves carried him westward. The sea now both cradle and captor. Days blurred into timeless expanse, sun tracing endless arcs across cloudless vault. Nights unfolding star-canopied infinities. No land-marred horizon. Only water stretching uniform to world's edge. Breathing rhythmic beneath fragile craft. Salt crusted his skin. Lips cracked parchment under solar assault. Thirst gnawed constant. Quenched sparingly from rainwater pooled in sailcloth. Hollows hunger hollowed deeper than flesh. Not mere stomach's complaint, but soul's isolation echoing Thrinacious sacrilege. Raft drifted purposeless. Currents capricious, winds whispering mockery of former voyages. Odysseus lay prone often, cheek-pressed weathered with listening ocean's subterranean murmurs, feeling pulse of creation vast and different. Mornings dawned identical, sun cresting molten, gilding waves molten gold, seabirds wheeling curious overhead dropping shellfish pityingly. He cracked shells patient stones, flesh meager sustenance, brine bitter compliment. Afternoons baked merciless. Heat shimmer distorting vision, hallucinations flickering mirage-like, phantom sails distant, crew voices calling faint wind-torn. Nights cooled merciful, stars emerging confessional, constellations shifting familiar patterns, whispering celestial navigation denied by current's mastery. Time dissolved measureless, days, weeks, marked only internal, sun-up pulse, wave cadence, star procession. Memory surfaced unbidden, vivid as fresh wounds. Ithaca's olive groves do kiss dawn. Penelope's loom rhythmic hearthside. Telemachus' infant laughter echoing stone corridors. Troy's siege recurred sepia-toned. Campfires dotting sand companionable. Comrades' jests wind-carried. Agamemnon's flawed kingship distant lesson. Cyclops' cave revisited contemplative. Polyphemus' solitude mirroring present isolation profounder. Siren's melody haunted nocturnal vigils. Not temptation now, but ache refined. Home's essence distilled pure, binding stronger than Circe's ropes. Underworld shades paraded procession gentle. Alpiner smile wistful, Tiresias gaze approving. Achilles' quiet wisdom beyond glory. Each apparition carried counsel wordless, transforming solitude from curse to classroom oceanic. Odysseus conversed aloud often, voice-hoarse companion seabirds. Brothers, shades, row with me invisible. Penelope, weave patient distant. Wave side response enigmatic, phosphorescence tracing hull nightly like spectral oars. Hunger evolved spiritual, Thrinacious cattle load phantom reproachful. Helios sun glaring judgmental zenithal. Yet revelation crystallized wave rocked. Abundance's true test restrained internal, not external denial. Odysseus laughed cracked lips first genuine since shipwreck. God's teaching through extremity, stripping all but essence unadorned. Raft became temple adrift, sky cathedral vaulted, ocean altar boundless. Storms visited sporadic, not Thrinacious cataclysm but intimate tempests. Rain sheeting grateful, winds testing lashings precarious. Odysseus bailed rhythmic, muscles memory honed Troy labors, finding strange joy exertion pure. Calms followed crystalline, waters glass smooth mirroring firmament perfect, self-dissolving into cosmos momentary enlightenment. He traced constellations nightly meticulous, Polaris beckoning north faint yet insistent, Ithaca's latitude pulsing visceral heart compass. Dreams dominated nocturnal drift, recurring Penelope unmoving statue-like palace threshold, eyes searching horizon patient, loom idle dust gathering. Telemachus grew spectral adolescent, practicing spear throw sunlit fields, voice deepening paternal queries. Laertes appeared vineyard tending, gnarled hands pruning vines eternal, nodding grandson ward wisdom silent. Awakening brought tears saltless now, mingling resolve hardened crystalline. Survival not accident but destiny ordained, homeward inexorable though currents conspire. Sea life companionship evolved, dolphins escorting days-long leaping joyous, sharks circling ominous, yet non-aggressive, turtles surfacing ancient eyes wise. Odysseus trailed fingers water communing, feeling aquatic brotherhood wordless profounder human discourse. One dawn luminous, albatross perched mass shard companionate, enduring vigil mutual 3 days before wingspread departure symbolic. Physical decline mirrored spiritual ascent, flesh wasting, sinews taut parchment, vision sharpening paradoxically. Hunger transmuted meditative clarity, thirst deepened oceanic unity consciousness. Odysseus recited memorized poetry internal, Homer's precursors imagined, epic fragments composing mental, Odyssey nascent within wanderer solitary. Reflection deepened Tiresias' prophecies contextual. Each trial, lotus, cyclops, sirens, Scylla, cattle, layered preparation endurance absolute, stripping pretense, revealing core resilient. One storm-ravaged eve, lightning illuminated distant speck, land, mirage, heart surging futile, dawn clarified false hope, yet spark reignited. He fashioned sail remnant twigmast, capturing zephyrs fickle, whispering incantations Homeric. Winds gentle Athena's breath, Poseidon relent ancient grudge. Gods responded ambiguous, currents shifting fractionally favorable, storms spacing gracious. Memories familial dominated reverie prolonged, wedding Penelope's dawnlit terrace, Telemachus' birth hearth-warm cradled, Laertes' farewell vineyard embrace. Each recollection burnished brighter extremity, home crystallizing myth luminous, rather mere geography. Odysseus understood Penelope's waiting mythic parallel, both bound patient currents invisible, faith-soul navigation. 9th day adrift, transformation peaked, sun descending blood orange, waters calming unnatural. Odysseus lay supine immobile, breath shallow feathered, vision tunneling peripheral. Then voice, not hallucination but divine. Calypso's distant call merging Leucothea's sea nymph blessing. Veil take, swim certain. Translucent fabric materialized wristbound, buoyancy divine enfolding. Strength renewed miraculous. He abandoned raft sinking graceful. Stroke strong purposeful toward true landfall emergent. Stroke evolved trans-rhythmic, sea supporting rather hindering. Dolphins reappearing escort jubilant. Stars wheeled approving overhead. Moon full illuminating course crystalline. Memories accelerated montage. Entire Odyssey flashing wave crest instantaneous. Troy's horse stillness. Lotus forgetfulness. Cyclops solitude. Aeolus winds escaped. Lestrygonian mist. Circe's hearth warmth. Underworld shades luminous. Siren's soul song. Scylla's toll dignified. Cattle's forbidden savor. Storm's purification. Each fragment interlocked perfect mosaic homeward. Dawn broke triumphant as land solidified. Ogygia's shores welcoming. Calypso awaiting beach, expectant arms open. Odysseus staggered sand collapsing grateful. Goddess enfolding maternal. Drift complete, not endpoint but chrysalis. Solitude alchemized unbreakable core. Ocean's lessons etched indelible spirit gold. Calypso's caves echoed reflection prolonged post-rescue. Wanderer traced strand lines dawn dust, conversing waves contrite. Sea forgave plenary, dolphins playful constant, breezes sweetened benedictory. Sun resumed companionable, golden light blessing rather scourge. Odysseus stood taller, westward gazed resolute crystalline, bearing drifts weight transformed buoyancy infinite. One luminous Eve goddess approached softshod. Trial mastered absolute. Wind summoned departure ordained. Odysseus bowed gratitude oceanic. Heart lighter transmutation complete. Raft reconstructed patient divinity-aided hands. Provisions stacked maternal solicitude. Prow kissing waves valedictory. Solitary drift memory glowed constant. Infinite waters crucible essence purest. Isolation teacher profoundest. Voyage respired transformed luminous. Solitary attrition purified. Resilient isolation exalted. Shadowed certitude even vacancy accelerates home hearth incandescent. Legends internalized nocturnal. Underworld apparitions revisited luminous. Sirenic harmonies contemplated wistful. Celian told dignified eternal. Solar heard sacramental warning. Oceanic void alchemical. Solitude discovered fraternity cosmic. Internal jest sagacity profound. Solitary labors symphony oceanic perfected. Odysseus discerned architecture divine consummate. Sees voids distilling essence purest radiant. Encounters purifying Ithaca trajectory inexorable luminous. Ocean incarnated inexorability maternal. Drift discernment's costliest solitude gift. Sea enfolded paternal ultimate. Nocturnal luminosities, hull tracing benedictory eternal. Diurnal thermals, effortless ascension divine. Penultimate constellations confiding serial. Odysseus whispered zephyr solitary. Drifted void absolute. Discovered singular self luminous within. Sail rippled affirmative resolute. Vessel cleaving destiny furrow perfected. Odyssey respired ceaseless. Illuminated cumulative attrition. Fortified isolation's manifold embrace. Enshrouded shadowed certitude diminishment hastens hath fire glow transcendent. The sea delivered Odysseus to Ogygia as a weary gift from the waves, depositing him gently on sands warmed by eternal sun. Calypso's island emerged from mist like a dream half-remembered. Cliffs draped in flowering vines. Meadows blooming perpetual asphodel and hyacinth. Streams singing soft over polished pebbles. The goddess appeared not as divine ruler but tender guardian. Her auburn hair catching sea breeze. Eyes deep as forest pools reflecting compassion pure. She lifted him effortlessly, wrapping wanderer in soft linens, scented lavender and thyme, carrying him to caves where fountains bubbled crystal clear. Days blurred into timeless sanctuary. Mornings dawned peach-hued, mist rising slow from turquoise cove, where his raft rested repaired by unseen hands. Calypso moved graceful through sunlit routines, weaving fine cloth on loom humming rhythmic, gathering wild herbs from Ducus slopes, singing low melodies blending wave whisper. Odysseus rested first, body mending slow in shaded grottos, where air cooled pleasant, wounds closing under salves fragrant as summer gardens. Sleep came deep dreamless, years' weariness dissolving like mist at noon. As strength returned, he joined her gentle labors. Afternoons unfolded shaded groves, where they walked hand companionate, conversing softly of wanderings endured, God's capricious designs, home's persistent call. Calypso listened without jealousy, her presence steady hearthlight, goddess yet womanly, weaving Odysseus' tales into tapestries glowing cavern walls. Animals befriended him gradual, gentle deer nuzzling hands, birds perching shoulder confiding songs. Island breathed abundance effortless, fruits hanging heavy branches, fish sleeping shallows eager, springs flowing honey sweet. Time suspended peculiar here, days folding seamless, seasons absent, sun tracing lazy arcs zenithal. Odysseus explored paths winding cliffside, discovering hidden coves where seals basked sun-warm rocks, grottos echoing faint underworld shades approving. Calypso taught island secrets patient, sacred springs granting visions, trees bearing fruit restoring youth, winds carrying messages from distant gods. Yet paradise held subtle ache, beauty exquisite binding tighter than chains, comfort tempting eternal forgetfulness akin lotus shores revisited. Evenings gathered hearthside, fire crackling soft on driftwood sweet-scented, goddess spinning golden thread fire-glow dancing face luminous. Odysseus recounted Odyssey meticulous, Troy's patient siege, Cyclops' solitary cave, Aeolus' winds escaped folly, Siren's soul song resisted, Scylla's toll dignified, Thrinacious' forbidden feast punished, solitary drift alchemical. Calypso nodded understanding divine, fingers tracing his rope scars tenderly, weaving balm deeper than salves. Meals unfolded, ritual slow. Bread baked, earth oven steaming. Olives glistening, oil golden. Cheeses creamy, herbs infused. Wine flowing, amphory crimson. Conversation deep and philosophical. Mortality's gift versus immortality's weight. Wandering's purpose, home's essence. God's lessons disguised cruelties. Odysseus felt youth returning, gradual. Sinew strengthening. Gaze sharpening, westward, instinctive. Yet Calypso's gaze held quiet, longing unspoken. Islands embrace, reluctant loosening. Months accumulated, uncounted. Perhaps 7, perhaps endless. Paradise weaving subtle spell. Odysseus crafted loom-side often. Hands rediscovering craftsman skills long dormant. Carving olive wood figurines, Ithaca bound. Penelope smiling. Telemachus spear practicing. Laertes vine pruning. Calypso admired creations tender. Eyes misting faint at mortal memories evoked. Walks lengthened, contemplative. Cliff paths overlooking infinite sea where home pulsed, horizon distant, magnetic. One twilight luminous. Goddess led him, sacred spring mirroring stars premature. Time ripens departure. She murmured, voice husky acceptance. Odysseus bowed, gratitude oceanic. Heart torn, dual. Island solace cherished. Ithaca's hearth imperative. Calypso wept, silent tears pearlescent. Weaving farewell cloak imperishable. Packing provisions divine. Ambrosia sweet fruits. Healing salves eternal. Raft reinforced, cedar unyielding. Dawn departure, dawn flawless. Sails filling, zephyrs goddess summoned. Calypso stood beach, long white silhouette against emerald meadows. Waving linen, slow rhythmic. Islands shrank, gradual astern. Caves vanishing, mist. Cliffs folding, sea haze. Essence lingering, heart woven. Odysseus whispered, deck side. Paradise taught relinquishment. Home awaits, relinquished. Ocean welcomed wanderer solitary once more. Currents favorable, goddess gifted. Wind steady, companioning. Days passed reflective. Islands peace ballast against coming trials. Odysseus traced coastline memory. Distinguishing Ogygia's bomb transformative. Not entrapment, but respite restorative. Calypso's love, selfless, rather possessive. Dreams clarified nightly. Penelope's loom resumed rhythmic. Telemachus adolescent tall, striding palace halls. Laertes vines flourishing, paternal care. Family pulsed visceral. Islands lessons clarifying home's paramountcy. Crew less, vessel glided, phantom light. Labor's solitary meditative. Meals savored, sacramental. Portions shared, spectral, comrades remembered. Wine libated, Calypso's name grateful. Stars wheeled, confiding overhead. Constellations aligning, homeward precise. Odysseus comprehended, pattern divine consummate. Paradise tests detachment, profounder, storm's fury. Relinquishment weighs heavier, golden chains. One star-canopied eve. Albatross circled thrice, valedictory before vanishing eastward, symbolic. Odysseus laughed, cracked lips, genuine. God's messengers ubiquitous. Lessons layered, infinite. Drift transformed, purposeful. Isolation cherished, teacher, rather tormentor. Sea cradled, paternal. Phosphorescence guiding, nightly faithful. Diurnal thermals buoyant, effortless. Reflection deepened, oceanic vigil prolonged. Calypso incarnated, respite divine. Island discernment's gentlest trial. Comfort's temptation, severest wanderer's test. Odysseus recited epic nascent mental. Verses flowing, wave rhythm perfected. Trials cumulative, distilling essence, purest radiant. Ithaca loom tangible. Olive oil scent haunting, breezes constant. Loom song pulsing, swell eternal. Family huff fire, magnetic inexorable. Nights clarified, Polaris beacon brilliant. Latitude home pulsing, heart compass unerring. Solitude evolved, fraternity cosmic. Phantom crew rowing, spectral synchronized. Penelope weaving, distant supportive. Gods conversing, star language subtle. Hunger transmuted, meditative. Thirst oceanic unity profound. Body vessel spirit luminous. One luminous Eve constellation serial confiding. Odysseus murmured Zephyr. Paradise relinquished. Discovered home singular luminous within. Sail rippled affirmative resolute. Prow cleaving destiny furrow perfected solitary. Odyssey respired ceaseless luminous. Illuminated paradise attained. Fortified relinquishments embrace manifold. Enshrouded shadowed certitude comfort hastens. With fire glow transcendent. Calypso's caves echoed phantom welcoming. Wanderer bearing island paradise. Transformed internal hearth eternal. Legends internalized nocturnal vigil. Underworld apparitions revisited luminous. Sirenic harmonies contemplated wistful. Selian told dignified eternal. Solar heard sacramental warning. Oceanic void alchemical chrysalis. Ogygian solace, relinquished gold. Solitude discovered fraternity profundum cosmic. Internal jest sagacity infinite. Solitary labors symphony oceanic consummate. Prolonged peregrination advanced incandescent. Chastened paradise. Resilient relinquishment. Shadowed certitude abundance accelerates. Homecoming tempered divine. Sea enfolded maternal ultimate. Nocturnal luminosities. Hull tracing benedictory eternal. Diurnal thermals effortless ascension celestial. Final constellations materialized Eve serial approving. Hard buoyed equilibrium absolute. Paradise balanced purpose. Solace amplifying home's imminence incandescent. Calypso's farewell winds carried Odysseus across final seas with gentle insistence. The raft transformed by divine craft into vessel seaworthy. Days passed in contemplative quiet. Horizon gradually resolving from infinite blue to familiar contours. Rugged silhouettes etched against dawn's roseate glow. Ithaca emerged not sudden but patient. Cliffs rising memory-shaped. Olive groves terracing hillsides dew-kissed. Bays cradling moonlit waters like ancestral arms. The air thickened home scent, time-wild, salt-crusted. Earth warm from vineyards ancient. Heart swelled unbidden. Tears tracing salt paths down weathered cheeks unashamed. Night cloaked arrival merciful. Moon silvering coastlines intricate. Odysseus beached softly on pebbled cove below palace heights. Waves sighing welcome hushed. Athena appeared mist-shrouded, goddess manifesting tender. Disguised beggars' rags. Aid your form. Suitors infest hall. Penelope weaves patient. Telemachus quests paternal truth. Wanderer nodded obedient. Divine mist enveloping transformative. Limbs stooping. Hair whitening ash. Garments tattered salt stiffened. Voice graveling wanderer's rasp. Yet eyes burned recognition in her. Spirit unbowed buoyant home soil firm. He climbed paths moonlight guided. Familiar stones greeting sandal-worn feet like old comrades. Olive trees whispered leaf rustle paternal. Figs heavy branches nodding heavy sweet. Distant palace glowed lantern faint. Laughter coarse echoing from hall. Suitors feasting insolent. Penelope's looms silent distant. Odysseus paused terrace overlook. Gazing homeland reclaimed after 20 years wander. Siege, storms, shades, songs, straits, sacrilege, solitude. All distilling this moment luminous. Breath steadied reverent, God's architecture consummate revealed. Dawn broke compassionate, mist veiling wanderers approach. Shepherds stirred flocks early, voices calling familiar across valleys unchanged. Odysseus descended humbly, staff tapping earth resonant, encountering first swineherd Eumaeus, loyal servant unchanged, face lighting astonished hospitality pure. Stranger weary, rest hearth warm, Eumaeus insisted, leading to hut smoke-scented where pork simmered slow. Bread course shared gratefully. Conversation unfolded gentle. Suitor's depredation detailed sorrowful. Penelope's fidelity steadfast. Telemachus' quest paternal brave. Odysseus listened heart-aching recognition veiled. Weaving wander tales artful. Crete storms. Egyptian sands. Phoenician treacheries. Truths disguised fiction masterful. Eumaeus' hound sniffed cautious then welcomed. Tails wagging slow trust earned. Hut filled simple abundance. Cheese used milk fresh. Olives brine sharp. Wine watered red heartwarming. Odysseus felt home's essence distilled humble. Loyalty unswerving. Hospitality sacred. Earth connection profound. Nap came hearthside deep. Dreams Penelope smiling loomside. Telemachus striding confident spear practice. Awakening brought resolve crystalline. Patience final trial. Revelation pace divine. Afternoon wandered rural paths memory haunted. Vineyards laerties tended flourishing paternal care evident. Ancient king appeared stooped vineyard pruning. Hands gnarled soil darkened, eyes distant grief veiled. Odysseus paused respectful. Athena restraining recognition impulse. Conversation flowed natural. Wanderers feigned hardships shared empathetic. Laerties sorrow paternal poured unguarded. Heart wrenched near breaking. Yet discipline held. God's timing impeccable. Reunion orchestrated subtle. Telemachus returned quest complete. Ship docking harbor hushed. Odysseus watched unseen from hill shadow. Sun grown tall, striding confident. Companions loyal, trailing respectful. Recognition divine sparked flickered. yet restraint prevailed. Athena guiding perfect. Father shadowed son's path palaceward. Heart swelling pride paternal unvoiced. Palace neared imposing yet familiar. Stone wall sun warmed. Courtyard fountains bubbling melodic. Hall resounding suitors revelry course. Suitor sprawled insolent. Antinous arrogant central. Eurymachus silver-tongued. Throng feasting Penelope stores prodigal. Hounds cowering beaten. Servants burdened tear-traced. Odysseus entered beggar disguised unremarked. Hauled in swallowing humble arrival. Penelope appeared threshold regal weary. Eyes searching constant yet hopeless. Wanderer gazed unseen beloved. Years etching beauty refined rather diminished. Loom abandoned grief shrouded. Yet grace enduring luminous. Irene greeted cautious. Offering crusts begrudged. Suitors mocking beggar filth. Odysseus bore insult stoic. Athena's strength in her sustaining. Night deepened hall clearing reluctant. Penelope retiring sorrow veiled. Wanderers sheltered portico drafty. Stars confiding overhead. Home reached. Patience perfects. Sleep came vigil light. Dawn promising revelation paced. Mornings unfolded tension simmering. Suitors hunting arrogant. Odysseus laboring humble. Wood chopping steady. Water hauling patient. Tales weaving masterful. Telemachus conversed beggar respectful. Paternal bond stirring subconscious. Eumaeus visited frequent. Loyalty deepening shared sorrow. Penelope summoned wanderer private. Testing loyalty tales Troy era. Odysseus answered flawless memory drawn. Queen's eyes misting recognition faint. Heartache dual. Nearness exquisite. Revelation withheld divine. Afternoons courtyard rested. Hounds gathering faithful lapse. Servants confiding suitor oppression tearful. Odysseus dispensed counsel subtle. Patience outlives force. Cunning prevails hubris. Home restores rightful. Gods orchestrated encounters meticulous. Athena whispering strategy nocturnal. Poseidon relenting grudge ancient. Zeus nodding celestial approval. Ithaca breathed alive familiar. Waves ancestral sighing. Winds olive whispering. Earth paternal embracing. Evenings hall gathered. Suitors reveling prodigal. Odysseus enduring mockery stoic. Antinous hurled stool rage. Yet divine shield deflected harmless. Penelope descended sorrowful. Weaving contest announced. Boutest suitors failing comical. Tension coiled springtight. Yet wanderer breath calm oceanic. Trials culminating revelation luminous. Recognition dawn flare divine. Telemachus confiding nocturnal. Paternal gaze piercing veil. Embrace fierce whispered. Laertes summoned vineyard reunion tearful. Ancient king rejuvenated joy sudden. Gods unveiled wanderer true form resplendent. Palace stirring wonder hushed. Suitors frozen hubris shattered. Bowstrings singing taught perfect. Hall transformed judgment hall sacred. Justice unfolding measured rather vengeant. Reunion cascaded hearthwarm. Penelope's gaze locking soul deep. Embrace dissolving 20 years longing. Tears mingling salt sweet. Telemachus clasping father awed. Laertes beaming vineyard pride restored. Servants rejoicing faithful. Hounds leaping joyous. Palace refilled rightful rhythm. Loom resuming melodic. Feasts grateful abundant. Songs bards celebrating homecoming eternal. Ithaca exhaled complete. Wanderer restored kingly humble. Trials alchemized wisdom communal. Odysseus stood terrace dawnlit. Sea sighing benedictory below. God's tapestry consummate woven flawless. Days restored gentle rhythm ancestral. Vineyard pruning Laertes side. Spear practice Telemachus shared. Loom weaving Penelope companionate. Palace hummed harmony restored. Meals familial laughter filled. Tales Odyssey nightly hearth circled. Gods honored libations grateful. Odysseus pondered voyage luminous retrospective. Each trial, siege patience. Lotus forgetfulness resisted. Cyclops solitude shared. Winds folly learned. Shades wisdom gathered. Sirens soul tested. Straits told dignified. Cattle sacrilege purified. Drift alchemical. Paradise relinquished. Distilling home essence purest. Night stark and fighting. Penelope nestled close. Odysseus whispered eternal. Wandered world. Discovered home singular infinite within. Waves sighed concordance ancestral. Huth fire crackling lullaby perfect. Odyssey respired complete luminous. Illuminated cumulative trials. Fortified reunions manifold embrace. Enshrouded shadowed certitude wandering hastens hearthglow transcended eternal. The palace halls rang with quiet restoration after Revelation's dawn, but Odysseus felt drawn to simpler rhythms, the earth's steady breath beyond stone walls. Disguised still as humble wanderer, he sought Eumaeus' distant hut, where swine grazed olive-shaded hills, air thick with damp earth and crackling hearth smoke. Paths wound familiar underfoot, worn by years' passage, figs dropping soft from branches heavy, distant sea sighing ancestral below. Moonlight silvered vineyard rows laertes tended, old king humming low as pruners snipped rhythmic. Eumaeus' domain unfolded pastoral, low stone walls moss-covered, enclosing pig pens mud-warm, sows grunting content litters suckling, boars rooting gentle acorns fallen. Hut crouched tumble thatch-roofed, smoke curling lazy chimney stone, door hanging leather-hinged welcoming. Swineherd appeared weathered kind, beard salt-flecked, eyes lighting astonished at beggar's return. Stranger friend, rest renewed, pork simmers slow, bread warms ash-hot. He insisted, voice gravel-warm, leading inside where fire danced cheerful on clay walls. They settled benches rush-woven, Eumaeus pouring wine-watered goat smoke sweet from cracked amphory. Conversation flowed unhurried, like hut's spring bubbling corner clear. Suitor's depredation detailed sorrowful, Penelope's loom-weaving patient vigil, Telemachus' growth spear-strong, quest brave. Odysseus listened, heart swelling, loyalty pure, weaving wonder tales masterful, Egypt's sands pyramid shadowed, Crete storms mass snapping, truths veiled fiction artful. Eumaeus nodded empathetic, refilling cups generous, hounds curling feet faithful warmth. Mornings dawned mist-cloaked, Eumaeus rising pre-dawn tending flocks, acorns gathered dew fresh, troughs filled spring water clear, sows led meadow grazing gentle. Odysseus joined labors willing, staff herding strays patient, mud squelching sandal soft, air crisp time scented. Work unfolded meditative, fences mended reed woven sturdy, salt rubs swine flanks winterproof, tales exchanged breath panted. Eumaeus shared youth memories, stolen Syracusan child, Odysseus' boyhood gifts cloak fine, loyalty forged hearth eternal. Wanderer smiled veiled, heart-aching recognition near. Afternoons rested hut shade, bread barley-crusted shared cheese used creamy, olives brine tangy. Conversation deepened philosophical, master's duties humble servant's honor, home's essence soil-bound rather gold-piled, patience outliving sword sharp. Eumaeus' wife appeared shy bread-bearing, children peeking door-curious wide-eyed. Family wove simple tapestry, laughter bubbling stewpot steam, song some chores accompanied, life pulsing earth rhythm unadorned. Odysseus felt Ithaca distilled pure here, loyalty unswerving, labor dignified, hearth sacred humble. Sunsets painted hills violet gold, pigs bedding straw deep grunting content, evenings firelit prolonged. Eumaeus spinning yarn goat wool soft, Odysseus carving whistles reed sweet pig call perfect. Stories circled endless, God's whimsy tested faithful, wanderers' homes heart carried. Swineherd's vigil, Odysseus returned patient 20 years. Voice graveling beggar rasp, wanderer praise servant true. Riches fade, loyalty endures stone eternal. One dawn mist-silvered, Telemachus visited unannounced horsebacked. Sun grown striding confident cloak sea wind scented. Conversation flowed paternal veiled, beggar advising youthwise. Eumaeus beaming pride surrogate. Odysseus watched heart pounding recognition divine restrained. Athena whispering patience perfect. Telemachus gifted cloak fine swineherd grateful, departing palace bound purposeful. Father traced son's path hill shadowed, pride swelling oceanic unvoiced. Days deepened bond fraternal, hunts wild boar dawn chill spear shared. Vines pruned laertes near wisdom tripled, streams fished net woven trout silver. Eumaeus confided suitor fears tear traced, hall plundered stores dwindling. Penelope's sorrow veiled constant, justice delayed divine. Odysseus vowed subtle, rightful returns, patience perfect's bowstring taught. Swineherd nodded faith unshaken, loyalty hearth anchored eternal. Knights stark and fighting hut door leaned, Odysseus pondered pattern pastoral. Humble lives weaving epic silent, swineherd's vigil paralleling Penelope's loom endless. Loyalty God's finest offering. Pigs slumbered pen deep rhythmic, breathing mirroring sea swell remembered. Sleep hearth warm dreamless came, awakening purpose renewed crystalline. Storm visited gentle, Rains pattering thatch rhythmic, wind sighing oak ancient, hut secure family huddle warm. Eumaeus recounted Odysseus' boyhood hunts boar fierce, gifts cloak wool finest, promise returned sworn starlit. Wanderer laughed horse genuine, tears saltless mingling wine red, God's orchestrated revelation paced. Swineherd first witness true form dawn glimmering, embrace fierce brotherhood eternal, tears mutual salt sweet. Return palace heralded humble, Eumaeus striding staff proud beside king unveiled, swine fresh slaughtered feast ready. Hall stirred wonder hushed, servants weeping joy, suitors frozen hubris shattered. Swineherd seated on a right Odysseus' side, portions choicest shared grateful. Loyalty rewarded tangible, lands granted fertile, hut palace annexed grandeur, family elevated grace royal. Yet Eumaeus remained earth-tethered simple, tending flocks dawn dusk faithful. Ithaca exhaled harmony restored pastoral, vineyards flourishing triune pruning, meadows swine grazed abundant, hut hearth eternal swineherd family. Odysseus visited frequent staff tapping, sharing wine goat milk sweet tales Odyssey layered. Reflection deepened hut vigil prolonged. Eumaeus incarnated fidelity purest, swineherd's life discernment's humblest lesson, loyalty's quiet power outshining crowns golden. Odysseus recited epic nascent fireside, verses flowing pastoral rhythm perfected, trials cumulative distilling humble essence radiant. Ithaca pulsed visceral complete, olive oil scent constant, earth pulse familial, loyalty swine pen distilled home hearth. Nights clarified stars confiding, Eumaeus snoring companionate nearby. Solitude evolved fraternity pastoral, phantom crew spectral swine tending, Penelope weaving supportive distant, gods conversing hearth language subtle. Labor transmuted meditative, simplicity oceanic unity profound. One luminous eve constellation serial, Odysseus murmured swineherd sleeping. Humble tended faithful, discovered home singular woven within. Fire crackled affirmative gentle, pigs sighing pen deep lullaby perfect. Odyssey respired pastoral luminous, illuminated humble loyalties. Fortified swineherds embrace eternal, enshrouded shadowed certitude simplicity hastens hearthglow transcendent. Prolonged harmony advanced pastoral incandescent, chastened revelations, resilient fidelities, shadowed certitude humble accelerates, homecoming divine. Hut enfolded fraternal ultimate, nocturnal fire glows pig trails benedictory eternal, diurnal labors effortless ascension humble. Family expanded hearth inclusive, legends circulated fireside generational. Underworld revisited luminous, sirenic harmonies wistful, trials dignified eternal, swineherd vigil sacramental core. The palace halls hummed with restrained anticipation as evening shadows lengthened across terracotta floors, lanterns flickering soft on bronze stands. Penelope's chambers glowed upper story warm, looms rhythmic tap echoing faint through stone corridors, like heartbeat patient. Odysseus, beggar disguised still, lingered courtyard shadows observing queen's silhouette window framed, graceful form bent thread weaving, hair falling auburn cascade lamplight caught. 20 years, waiting etched face refined rather diminished, eyes distant horizon searching yet inward focused resolute. Suitors carouse below course, voices slurring wine-heavy boasts, oblivious climax coiled spring tight. Athena whispered nocturnal strategy. Patience perfects revelation, Boutest unveils rightful. Wanderer nodded divine obedient, heart-aching duel, beloved nearness exquisite, unveiling withheld God's timed. Dawn broke mist-pearled, Penelope descending regal weary throne carved, announcing contest solemn. Whoso strings Odysseus' bow and shoots massed arrows true claims hand-weaving. Suitors cheered hubris veiled, hall-filling tension electric yet unspoken. Odysseus watched threshold humble, staff leaning feigned frailty masking strength tempered Odyssey hardened. Morning unfolded ritual measured, breakfast olives glistening, bread barley crusted steaming, cheeses used creamy shared tense. Suitors jostled bow vault arrogant, weapon massive unyielding, olive wood recurved strong kings only. Antinous first, muscles straining veins bulging, strings slipping feudal sweat beaded. Eurymachus followed silver-tongued grace failing, with mocking unbent. Throng rotated comical, nobles reduced straining boys, hall laughter turning uneasy. Penelope watched impassive, eyes flickering beggar ward recognition faint, instinct deep. Telemachus intervened youth authoritative, claiming bow paternal right denied suitor protest. String hum taut near perfect. Arrow knocked steady, yet falling short divine restrained. Odysseus nodded sun-proud heart-swelling. Paternal bond unspoken luminous. Eumaeus carried final polish, wood gleaming, placing beggar feet humble. Suitors scoffed ragged filth unworthy, yet Penelope commanded gracious. Stranger tests. Fate decides worthy. Hall hushed expectant. Air thick hearth smoke, and tension palpable. Odysseus seated bench low, staff aside feigned. Hands gnarled age-veiled, gripping wood familiar. Hall leaned forward, collective breath held. Penelope's gaze locking soul-piercing across throng. String bent gradual, with arching supple memory responsive. Sinews corded subtle under rags tattered. Creak echoed cavernous, tension coiling perfect. Then snapped triumphant, bow strung taut alive humming. Suitors blanched hubris shattered, murmurs rippling panic veiled. Telemachus beamed recognition dawning. Eumaeus nodding faith unshaken. Arrow knocked fluid. Gaze masked apertures aligned unerring. Release whispered, shaft whistling air true. Piercing 12 ring seamless. Quivering embedded flawless. Silence absolute descended. God's breath held collective. Odysseus rose transformed. Rags falling divine misshredded. Form regal youth restored gleaming. Bow claims rightful. Voice resonant hall filling. Penelope gasped tear-misted. Suitors frozen terror pale. Recognition cascading revelation luminous. Chaos erupted controlled. Suitors scrambling weapons frantic. Odysseus commanding thunderous. Justice delayed perfects. Telemachus barred doors youth valiant. Eumaeus loyal spear ready. Faithful servants arming resolute. Massacre unfolded measured rather vengeant. Antinous first arrow pierced, throat gurgling. Eurymachus pleading silver-tongued feudal. Throng falling sequential dignity denied. Blood pooled marble dark slow. Hall transforming judgment sanctuary sacred. Penelope watched impassive justice divine. Loom abandoned vigil rewarded luminous. Athena intervened storm-shrouded sparing slaughter complete. Shades gathering mist early underworld bound. Bodies cleared respectful dawn servants. Hall cleansing libations purifying. Odysseus approached Penelope slow reverent. 20 years gaze locking eternal. Queen tested final. Bed secret prove. Voice trembling love veiled. Wanderer recounted posts oak bed carved bridal love. Doors tree grown sealed faithful. Tears cascaded mutual salt sweet. Embrace dissolving longing oceanic. Reunion hearth deep complete. Nights restored intimate. Bridal chamber oak bed sacred. Penelope nestled close, weaving fingers love tangled. Stories Odyssey whispered breath shared. Telemachus trained spear strong paternal guided. Eumaeus elevated lands granted, tending flocks honored. Laertes vineyard rejuvenated, joined feasts, familial laughter resounding. Palace pulsed harmony ancestral. Loom tapping melodic constant. Meals abundant gratitude filled. Songs barred celebrating homecoming eternal. Reflection deepened chamber vigil prolonged. Bow incarnated culmination perfect. Penelope's weaving patiences loomed divine. Trials distilled revelation radiant purest. Odysseus recited epic nascent Penelope listening. Verses flowing love rhythm consummate. Siege patience initiated. Lotus forgetfulness resisted. Cyclops solitude shared. Wind's folly learned. Shades wisdom gathered. Siren soul tested. Straits told dignified. Cattle sacrilege purified. Drift alchemical. Paradise relinquished. Swineherd fidelity core. Bow strung triumphant. Days vineyard strolled hand-clasped. Olive oil sent enveloping constant. Sea sighing benedictory below eternal. Ithaca exhaled complete luminous. Wanderer restored kingly humble weathered. Trials alchemized communal wisdom infinite. God's tapestry consummate woven flawless. Patience outlives force. Love weaves stronger steel. Home essence heart carried inexhaustible. Harmony advanced familial incandescent. Chastened revelations cumulative. Resilient reunions manifold. Shadowed certitude trials accelerate home glow transcendent. Palace enfolded hearth ultimate. Nocturnal fireglows family trails benedictory eternal. Diurnal labors effortless ascension divine. Legends circulated generational fireside. Underworld luminous revisited. Sirenic wistful harmonies. Dignified trials eternal. Weaving vigil sacramental core. Bowstring triumphant seal. One star canopied eve constellations confiding serial. Odysseus murmured. Penelope nestled, wandered infinite, discovered home, singular luminous woven within. Loom tapped affirmative distant, waves ancestral sighing lullaby perfect. Odyssey respired complete incandescent, illuminated epic entirety, fortified love's embrace eternal, enshrouded shadowed certitude wandering perfects, hoof fire transcendent. The palace settled into rhythms as old as the island itself, days unfolding like threads on Penelope's loom, steady, patient, woven with quiet care. Dawn light filtered through olive branches, touching courtyard fountains, where water sang soft over smooth stones. Odysseus woke early now, his body remembering the feel of home soil underfoot, the scent of time rising with the mist. He walked the familiar paths without haste, staff tapping gently, pausing to watch goats wander hillside meadows or fishermen mending nets in the cove below. Penelope joined him often in these morning hours, her hand light on his arm, the two speaking little but understanding much. The loom stood ready in her chamber, threads waiting patient, but time for weaving came later, after shared bread still warm from the ovens, after olives glistening with new pressed oil. Telemachus practiced spear throws in the fields, his form strong and sure, glancing back now and then for his father's nod of approval. Laertes visited from the vineyards, his hands still dark with earth, sharing stories of seasons past while the sun climbed slow. Evenings gathered the family by the hearth, fire crackling low on apple wood, smoke curling sweet up the chimney. Servants moved quiet with pitchers of watered wine, cheeses soft and figs ripe from the trees. Eumaeus joined often, bringing fresh pork roasted slow, his face lit with the simple joy of belonging. Conversation flowed gentle, no more tales of storms or shades, only the small things. A new vine taking root, a ewe birthing twins, the sea calm enough for tomorrow's catch. Laughter came soft, like waves on sand, filling the hall with warmth that needed no words. The palace felt alive again, not with noise but breath, doors creaking open to breezes from the sea, linens drying on lines strung across the courtyard, hounds stretching lazy by the steps. Odysseus spent afternoons in the workshop, carving small figures from olive wood, a ship with full sails, a shepherd with his flock, a loom with threads half-woven. Penelope watched sometimes from the doorway, smiling at the care in his hands, then returning to her own work with threads dyed soft as sunset. Laertes taught Telemachus the vineyard ways, how to read the soil's quiet moods, when to prune gentle without harming the root. The old king moved slower now, but his eyes held peace, the weight of years lifted by reunion's light. Eumaeus tended his expanded herds with the same devotion, his hut now closer to the palace, family growing under his thatched roof. Meals stretched long under lantern glow, stories circling back to simple truths. The gods favor patience. Home lives in small moments shared. Nights deep and gentle, stars spreading thick across the sky like scattered grain. Odysseus and Penelope retired to their chamber, the oak bed carved long ago still solid as memory. She traced the scars on his arms, from Cyclops stone, Scylla's grasp, Thrinacious storm, her touch healing deeper than time. Sleep came easy now, dreams soft and familiar, waves lapping Ithaca's shores, olive leaves rustling in breeze, the looms tapped like a heartbeat steady. Seasons turned slow on Ithaca, marking time without rush. Spring's wildflowers carpeting hills, summer's sun ripening grapes heavy, autumn's mist softening the air, winter's rains filling streams to bubbling. Odysseus explored coves he knew as a boy, diving for smooth stones or watching seals bask on rocks warmed by sun. Penelope wove tapestries now of their story, not the storms or trials, but the quiet returns, the swineherd's hut, the bow strung true, the olive grove at dawn. Telemachus spoke of his own journeys ahead, but always circled back to home's pull. The people of Ithaca came often, shepherds with wool fresh sheared, fishermen with baskets of mullet silver-scaled, women carrying bread braided sweet. Feasts filled the courtyard under stars, lyres playing melodies old as the sea, dances slow and circling like waves. Odysseus greeted each guest as equal, remembering how wanderers find welcome in small kindnesses. Eumaeus laughed loudest, his voice carrying over the crowd, Loyalty turned to joy shared wide. In these gatherings, the Odyssey felt complete. Not in ending, but in breathing. The trials had shaped him, but home restored him whole. Every scar a thread in the greater weave. Winter evenings drew close around the fire, rain pattering soft on the roof, like distant waves. Odysseus polished his old bow, string humming true under fingers practiced. Penelope spun wool nearby, spindle whirring steady, glancing up with eyes that held 20 years of waiting turned to peace. Telemachus read scrolls by lantern light, questions thoughtful about the world beyond. Laertes dozed gentle, waking to share one more vineyard tale. Eumaeus visited with pork stew steaming, hounds trailing hopeful at his heels. The hall filled with scents of home, bread baking, oil warming, with smoke sweet. Conversation wandered slow, memories of boyhood hunts, dreams of Telemachus' future voyages, Penelope's tapestries planned for the walls. No urgency touched these nights. Time moved like the sea at rest, full and calm. Sleep claimed them one by one, fire dying to embers glowing soft red. As years folded gentle onward, Ithaca held its wanderer close. Olive trees growing taller, vines bearing sweeter fruit, palace halls echoing laughter light. Odysseus stood often on the cliffs at dusk, watching sun melt into sea, feeling the gods' quiet nod in the breeze. Penelope joined him there, hand in his, the two content and silence shared. Telemachus sailed short voyages, always returning with salt on his skin and stories for the fire. Laertes rested more, vineyard cared for by faithful hands. Eumaeus' family grew, hut bustling with children's voices. The Odyssey lived now in daily breath, in the loom's tap, the staff's tap on stone paths, the waves' endless sigh below. No more wandering called. Home was the journey complete, peace the destination eternal. And so the story drifts now. Like mist over the sea at dawn, Odysseus rests easy. Penelope weaves her quiet patterns. The palace sleeps under watchful stars. The waves breathe soft against the shore. Olive leaves whisper in the night breeze. Hearth embers glow faint and warm. Let your thoughts settle here, in this place of gentle return. Eyelids growing heavy, breath slowing even. Home found, peace held close, drifting now into dreams as endless and calm as the sea itself.